Chapter 1389. Previously, when Luo Fan discovered that he was still controlled by the River of Luck, he had wanted to cut off that connection and cut off his own luck. But for a moment, he had forgotten that this luck was like a rope that was hanging onto him. Although it brought him great discomfort, although it made him extremely unhappy, if he cut it off, he might fall to his death. In other words, the current him had not made any preparations for the state he would be in after he severed his luck. By severing this path of luck, he could indeed escape the control of the River of Luck. However, there was a greater possibility that he would die and his soul would scatter because he had lost the support of the path of luck. Thinking of this, Luo Fan felt a lingering fear. Fortunately, he had not cut off his luck just now. If he had, he might have turned into nothingness. Just as Luo Fan was feeling lucky, the Fate Union had reached a stage that required the help of the audience. When the River of Luck descended into the palace, the Book Supreme started to ask Wu Zun all sorts of questions. Of course, this kind of questioning was actually just a ritual. It was just like how ordinary people would ask, "Are you willing to?" when they got married, but it was a necessary ritual for them to get married. If it was among mortals, this kind of inquiry would naturally be regarded as a kind of nonsense. It would only be regarded as a kind of unnecessary ceremony deliberately set up to express solemnity and solemnity. However, in the cultivation world, especially for those who were participating in the Fate Union, when the audience was all level, 9 pseudo-saints, the truth of this ritual was completely revealed in front of everyone. Each of the book senior's questions caused the entire luck path to vibrate vigorously. As the River of Luck trembled, the luck of Wu Zun and the other 9 people also fluctuated. Every time Wu Zun answered a question, the ripples on their bodies would change subtly, and their connection with the River of Luck seemed to change as well. Just like that, the Book Supreme asked questions one by one. After Wu Zun, they were his confidants. Every question would cause the River of Luck to change, and every answer would also change the relationship between them and the River of Luck. Such a ritual. However, Luo Fan felt that it was somewhat familiar. He recalled for a while. He knew that he had done it for Luo Fu and Guangpu in the Primordial world. However, back then, he had only connected with the supreme Great Tao of the Primordial world. This time, what the Book Supreme had connected with was a higher level of the River of Luck, which might even affect the entire chaotic state. The difference between the two was like the difference between heaven and earth, like the difference between the clouds and the mud. However, since the difference was so huge, the degree of complexity was naturally completely different. At that time, Luo Fan did not ask many questions. He only performed a short ceremony. Yet he had already completed the process and obtained supreme merit. But now, the questions that the Book Supreme was asking already numbered in the tens of thousands. Each and every sentence was extremely complicated. If not for the fact that everyone present was a pseudo-sage who took hundreds of millions of years as an instant and had amazing patience, no one would have been able to endure such a complicated ritual. As for what Luo Fan and the others had to do, it was actually very simple. That was, when the Book Supreme asked a question, he would repeat it to strengthen the imposing manner of the sentence. In fact, it would also strengthen the influence of the sentence on the River of Luck. This kind of response would not cause any harm to anyone. On the contrary, because it would affect the River of Luck, it might allow them to comprehend some of the mysteries of the River of Luck. They might even take the opportunity to sense their own luck and then do something according to their own luck, changing some of their own plans. This could be said to be a win-win situation. It was also because of this that the many level 9 pseudo-sages agreed so readily. There was no getting up early without benefits. This was a fact that would not change even if they were level 9 pseudo-sages. As the questions were asked, the entire great Kiliacosm shook continuously. The power of the countless dimensional realms in the starry sky that had turned into stars kept seeping into the void, affecting the River of Luck that had emerged from a state of chaos. This allowed the River of Luck to manifest in this world for as long as possible, making it easier for the River of Luck to be shaken by words. Judging from the fact that the Book Supreme did not dare to appear and could only integrate into this world to help it achieve this, it could be seen how difficult it was to achieve this. Compared to the other cultivators, who could only use this process to sense their own luck, Luo Fan's harvest from this process was greater. Through this strengthening, he was able to see his own luck more and more clearly. He finally knew what kind of existence his luck was. The Tao of luck was a ribbon made up of countless invisible threads that stretched out from every part of his body, and even all of the space-time in his body, and everything else. This ribbon was invisible and intangible, but it did not directly connect to the river of luck. Instead, after extending directly above his head, it broke off. Then, like a jump, it crossed space-time and connected to a certain location in the river of luck, and finally, it was controlled by the river of luck. This close connection made Luo Fan's hair stand on end, and his expression became more and more unsightly. It's actually such a tight control. If I can't transcend, doesn't that mean that all my fate is controlled? All my experiences and all my comprehensions will be affected? He thought to himself, but in his heart, he made up his mind to cut off this connection. Suddenly, he could not help but think, but maybe after cutting it off, there will be a deeper level of control, a higher level of control. Back then, he thought that after transcending the great Tao, he would no longer be controlled by luck. All his actions were all based on his own control and his own hard work. Everything depended on one's own control and hard work. They would no longer be affected by karmic luck, and they would no longer be under the control of the great Tao. But now, he realized that after he transcended the great Tao, there was still the river of luck controlling everything. This river of luck was like the great Tao of the past, and its control over him was actually so tight, so deep. Following this line of reasoning, wouldn't that mean that even if he cut off his connection with the river of luck, he would still be controlled by a higher level or a deeper existence? Thinking of this, Luo Fan suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of dejection. A cage within a cage. After breaking through a layer, there would be another layer, and so on and so forth. When would it end? At this moment of dejection, Luo Fan suddenly became alert. In an instant, his thoughts turned into a blade. In an instant, he cut off this dejection. In an instant, his mind regained clarity. That was close. I nearly got lost. After coming back to his senses, Luo Fan couldn't help but feel a sense of fear. That dejection just now was a great enemy of cultivation. If he allowed this dejection to continue, even if he didn't die, his cultivation would be affected, and it would be hard for him to improve in the future. So what if I break a cage to enter another cage? Since there is a cage ahead, I will continue to break it. Even if this cage never ends, I will always work hard to break all the cages that I can find. He once again strengthened his belief. Just like the river of luck in front of him, if he didn't find out that he was being controlled by this river of luck, then forget it. Since he found out, then he would naturally use all his efforts to completely cut off this control of luck. Like the great Tao of heaven and earth, he would completely transcend this river of luck. Perhaps he would still enter the control of a new existence, and he still wouldn't be able to completely transcend. However, before he found that existence, he wouldn't care. Once he found it, he would work hard to cut it off and transcend. If this cycle continued, there would come a day when he would truly transcend and be free. After being purified by this belief, Luo Fan felt his mind become much clearer. All of a sudden, he sensed the scent of karma on the river of luck. In an instant, he understood that karma was a part of the river of luck. At least, the karma that he currently grasped or used was a part of this river of luck. After he discovered this, he realized that there was fate, fortune, life, and various other existences above the river of luck. It was almost all-encompassing, like another form of great Tao. After discovering this part of the river of luck, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat, and a faint smile suddenly appeared on his face. An invisible long blade appeared in his body and instantly slashed at his luck Tao. In an instant, the ribbon that was formed from countless threads dimmed slightly, as if countless threads had been instantly severed. This caused the ribbon to suddenly become much dimmer, and his life source seemed to have been erased by an insignificant layer of filth, as if it had become slightly clearer. So this is how I have to sever it. I've finally found a way. This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. At this moment, an indescribable sense of relief enveloped him. In a trance, he felt like he had gotten rid of a layer of shackles. Now, the countless threads on the ribbon of luck didn't seem much different from before. The number was still the same, and there wasn't much difference compared to before. However, he knew that these threads were a little smaller than before, and the connection between them and him had been weakened a little. It was because this connection had been weakened that his life source had such a change. What he had used to slash at the path of luck was none other than the long blade materialized from the second level of the law of karma that he had grasped. This long blade had allowed him to sever a portion of the karma contained in the path of luck. This also caused a portion of the connection between his path of luck and the river of luck to be severed. This made him feel like he had gotten rid of a layer of shackles, and it made his life source a little purer. Unfortunately, his application of the law of karma had only reached the second level, so he couldn't completely sever the karma. If his application of the law of karma had reached the third level, the result of that slash just now would have been the same. Perhaps that slash would have completely severed the karma. Perhaps that slash would have completely severed all the karma. At that time, it wouldn't just be the connection between the path of luck and the river of luck that was weakened. Instead, all the connections would be completely severed, and he would completely transcend. From then on, he would no longer be controlled by the river of luck. That's right, it wasn't just a portion of it that was severed, but it was completely severed. Although karma was only a part of the river of luck, it was an extremely crucial part, and it was also an important support of the river of luck. Once it was severed, the path of luck would lose its support, and its own power would completely crush the connection. Thus, it would completely sever the connection between Luo Fan and the river of luck and transcend. However, in that case, Luo Fan would also be crushed into powder by that terrifying crushing power, and he would die and turn into nothingness. The river of luck itself might have controlled the endless perfect heaven and earth in the state of chaos, as well as the luck of all living beings in the vast heaven and earth. One could well imagine, if Luo Fan couldn't completely sever the connection, he would directly sever the connection between himself and the river of luck. He would no longer be connected to the river of luck. If he waited for the power of the river of luck to crush the connection, then the aftermath of the river of luck crushing the connection would instantly crush Luo Fan into nothingness. From his perspective, Luo Fan still hadn't grasped the third level of the law of karma, but it was a good thing that he could use it. After adjusting his body slightly, Luo Fan gradually returned to normal. He was now using the second level of the law of karma to replace the karma in the path of luck to support his body. In that case, apart from the fact that a large portion of his karma would no longer be under the control of Luck Dao, the karma between him and the river of Luck Dao would not be able to recover to its original state. It would remain in this state forever. Killing without karma. I should be able to achieve that now. He thought about the biggest change that happened to him after that slash. Because a large portion of his karma was no longer connected to luck, a large portion of his karma was independent and no longer interfered with other cultivators. In that case, a large portion of the karma that he might have gotten from killing other living beings would no longer affect him. Of course, this was only a large portion. After all, he hadn't severed all of the karma. There was still a portion of the connection between him and the river of luck. In that case, if he did something that caused too much karma, the karma would still affect him. This was clearly unavoidable. The biggest benefit of killing without karma was that after killing someone, he wouldn't have to worry that the person behind the killing would figure out that he was the one who did it. He wouldn't have to worry that the old would come out after killing the young. Apart from that, many strange abilities that relied on the connection of karma to produce effects would no longer be effective on him. In the process of Luo Fan's gains, the Fate Union ceremony had already reached its climax. Every time the Book Supreme asked a question, everyone in the audience had to respond accordingly. During this process, the river of luck in this hall was also becoming more and more turbulent and obvious. Perhaps only level 9 pseudo-sanctuaries could sense in the past, but now, even ordinary people could sense that something incredible was happening. Above the heads of Wu Zun and the others, the ribbons that represented luck gradually appeared. These ribbons originally couldn't be shaken or changed by any force. They would only slowly flutter and ripple in their original way. But now, these 10 ribbons started to deviate in one direction. As the ribbons turned, the connection between the luck path and the luck path river also moved with difficulty. They gradually moved from all directions towards the center, trying their best to gather together. During this process, the entire Great Thousand Realms started to shake violently. In the boundless starry sky, the endless dimensional realms started to flicker violently like ordinary stars. The boundless energy that gushed out of them even caused an energy tide, producing countless flames that were visible to the naked eye. It seemed as though those realms were surrounded by a strange mist, and the stars in the entire sky seemed to be shrouded by the mist. At this time, the figure of the Book Supreme that was asking Wu Zun and the others questions in this hall could no longer be maintained. Only his voice, which seemed to come from the heavens and earth, was left echoing in this hall. Obviously, at this time, the Book Supreme had already exerted his power to the limit. In the end, he even withdrew the power that was maintaining his figure, unwilling to waste it in this hall. At this time, Wu Zun and the others looked extremely nervous. Although the power in their bodies wasn't consumed much, their mental energy was greatly consumed. In order to guide the change of luck, every word they said required all of their mental energy. They needed to urge their life origin to the limit, and they needed to go deep into every part of their bodies, every space-time in their bodies, and everything else. That was the only way. Only then could they shake their luck, and only then could they truly succeed in combining their luck. Two completely different people's paths of fortune were completely different. This difference would result in a strong repulsion when the two people's fates were fused together. Under such circumstances, if two people loved each other, this repulsion would naturally be weakened by the strong love between them. Thus, the difficulty of combining their luck would be reduced. They might even be able to fuse together naturally. However, when there were more than two people combining their luck, the repulsion would become 10 times more complicated. And among the 3 people, naturally, they couldn't have the same deep love for each other. 2 of them would definitely be rivals in love. It was too late to hate each other, so how could there be any love? Therefore, this repulsion was, of course, very difficult to eliminate. They had to rely on forceful means to combine their luck. If this continued, when there were 10 people, the situation would be very complicated, and the repulsion would be very strong. It wasn't hard to imagine how strong the repulsion would be. Just like at this moment, the relationship between Wu Zun and the other 9 people was so complicated. Wu Zun's female confidants were naturally full of love for Wu Zun, which was enough to eliminate the repulsion between them. But they were extremely unhappy with each other, and even hated each other. Even if others died, they would only be happy and wouldn't shed a single tear. In this way, how could they eliminate the repulsion between their luck? And under the interaction of these repulsive forces, the repulsive force of Wu Zun's and their fates was even more affected, making it difficult for Wu Zun to fuse with the fates of any of his female friends. Therefore, the connection points of Wu Zun and the other 9 people in the long river of luck weren't affected much when they were far away. It was very easy to move them towards each other. However, when they were close to a certain distance, the repulsive force between them would increase to an unimaginable level. As a result, the book Venerable had to expend a great deal of energy and effort to combine them together. Wu Zun and the others obviously knew the difficulty. At this moment, they were wholeheartedly cooperating with the Book Supreme and wholeheartedly moving their own luck under the guidance of the Book Supreme. The Book Supreme was indeed extraordinary. The method he found was really exquisite. This was something that Luo Fan thought was almost impossible to succeed, but under the Book Supreme's guidance, it actually progressed quite smoothly. Luo Fan raised his eyes to look at the long river of luck and realized that although the 10 points weren't moving very fast, they were still getting closer and closer. The way the 10 points were moving wasn't ordinary either. Instead, they seemed to be following some kind of strange formation, constantly changing as they moved. They even seemed to be revolving around a fixed point in a special trajectory and a special frequency. Using their love for Wu Zun as a medium, and using Wu Zun's luck to balance the repulsion between them, then cancel each other out, making it difficult for the repulsion to have any effect. It's really incredible to be able to do this in a long river of luck. Luo Fan saw some key points from the trajectory of the 10 points, and he couldn't help but admire the Book Supreme. Things were developing very smoothly. In fact, it was so smooth that it was beyond imagination. The process that should have taken several months to complete had actually developed to the final stage in just a few days. Chapter 1390. Just as the 10 points that represented the fate paths were about to converge, the river of fate suddenly trembled in an irregular manner. Along with this tremble, the 10 points that had gathered suddenly scattered in all directions as if they were irreconcilable enemies. In the blink of an eye, the distance between them was much greater than before. This sudden change caused everyone's expression to change drastically. Among them, Wu Zun's expression was the most unsightly. Next were his female confidants. "What's going on?" The Book Supreme's exclamation came from the void. This is the fate path's backlash. 10 people's fates are fused together. It's rare to find such a thing. Going against the fate path's long river will result in a backlash. Luo Fan was shocked and instantly understood. At this time, the Book Supreme's incredulous voice came from the void. "How could there be a backlash? I've clearly prepared everything." Then the entire vast thousand realms shook violently. Among the countless medium-class realms, hundreds of millions of them collapsed in an instant. Endless, terrifying power poured into the central platform, causing the lines on the platform to flicker and shine crazily. Then, endless, mysterious power poured into the palace and directly blasted into the long river of fate path. This mysterious power was extremely magical. After it was poured into the long river of fate path, it naturally stopped the fates of Wu Zun and the other 9 people from drifting in all directions. Seeing such a change, Wu Zun and the others couldn't help but reveal looks of anticipation. Obviously, the Book Supreme's method had brought them hope. The medium-class realms in the world shattered one by one. More and more power poured into the palace, and the long river of fate path through all kinds of incredible changes. It locked onto the 10 points in an incredible way and kept pushing them back, trying its best to gather them together. At the same time, the Book Supreme's words echoed in the entire world. This time, his words seemed to have mobilized all of his power. It was like a thunderclap that reverberated continuously. At this moment, Wu Zun and the other 9 people naturally knew that this was a crucial moment. They also mobilized their own power and used a grand and heartfelt voice to answer this question. If the fates of the 10 people were fused together, their fates would be connected in the future. It was a matter of course to share blessings and sorrows. More importantly, if one of them could break free from the control of the Luck Dao River one day, the remaining 9 would be able to achieve the same thing. Without any conditions, he would also be able to escape the control of the River of Luck. Moreover, even if they were unable to escape the control of the River of Luck, their fates would still be completely linked under the effects of the River of Luck, and it would be impossible for them to never meet again. The River of Fate would naturally create all kinds of formless opportunities through some indescribable method, naturally allowing them to meet again. However, this was only if the fusion was successful. If the fusion of luck failed, the fate between them would develop in several completely different directions. In the future, even if they wanted to be together, the River of Fate would naturally create all kinds of special opportunities to separate them. It might even lead them to become enemies. They loved each other, but they had to kill each other. This was the profundity of the River of Luck. This was also the risk that fused luck had to take. From his point of view, any existence controlled by the river of luck was equivalent to a puppet, a marionette controlled by the river of luck. It was precisely because they knew this that Wu Zun and the others were extremely nervous at this moment. At this moment, Luo Fan sensed a formless message. This message was transmitted from the void into his heart, and he instantly sensed an indescribable god power. This god power was extremely profound, and it seemed to be a god power that could affect Luck Dao. Luo Fan raised his eyes and glanced around. In an instant, he discovered that almost every cultivator present had a slight change in expression. Obviously, they had also received the same information and obtained the same or different divine abilities. Looks like we need to do something. Luo Fan thought to himself. With a thought, the cultivation method of that god power was displayed in his mind. This god power seemed to be a god power that could change one's fate. If an ordinary cultivator obtained it, they would be able to use their own power to change their own fate easily. They would even be able to make their luck extremely outstanding, and it would not be a problem for them to stumble and pick up a pseudo-sage treasure. Even for a level 5 pseudo-sage like Luo Fan, this god power was extremely magical. As long as he performed this god power, he would naturally be able to see the river of luck and vaguely see the corresponding place on the river of luck. He would then be able to change the position of his own luck in the river of luck and ultimately achieve the effect of changing his own fate. So there's such a god power. It seems like the Book Supreme's foundation is much deeper than I imagined, Luo Fan thought to himself, and he began to comprehend this god power without standing on ceremony. Although this god power was not enough for Luo Fan to sever the connection between his own luck and the river of luck, it was enough for him to spend most of his energy on it. However, just being able to sense the river of luck was enough for him to spend most of his energy on it. As for what he would have to pay to receive this god power, he no longer cared. Luo Fan had now broken through the shackles of various realms, and even the mystery of a level 9 pseudo-sage was no longer something that he could not understand. Moreover, this god power was created for his identity as a level 5 pseudo-sage. The various descriptions and explanations of the god power were all for level 5 pseudo-sages, which were many times worse than level 9 pseudo-sages. Under such circumstances, it was a piece of cake for him to understand this divine art. Soon, he had complete control over everything about this god power. He also knew instantly. This ability was not like the formation that the other level 9 pseudo-sages taught him when they treated him as a chess piece. Instead, it was a simple ability to control luck. When Luo Fan first discovered this fact, he was naturally a little surprised. After all, this was the first god power that he had obtained from a level 9 pseudo-sage. However, he immediately reacted. His identity was already different, and the environment here was already different from before. His current identity was already on an equal footing with a level 9 pseudo-sage, and those who received this god power were no longer ordinary pseudo-sages, but level 9 pseudo-sages. With such an identity, under such conditions, if the Book Supreme dared to hide any schemes in this god power, he would definitely treat everyone as fools. He would definitely make everyone fall out with him. And it would be impossible for him to use this god power to help Wu Zun and the others fuse their luck like what the Book Supreme thought. This was very obvious. The Book Supreme was a level 9 pseudo-sage. Almost everyone present was a level 9 pseudo-sage. He wanted to hide his schemes. It would definitely be a dream not to be discovered by so many level 9 pseudo-sages. After fully understanding this god power, Luo Fan also knew what the Book Supreme wanted them to do. He wanted to see. He wanted to make use of everyone's strong luck to suppress this river of luck, so that the river of luck would not be too strong to stop Wu Zun and the others from fusing their luck. Any level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator could only become a level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator after hundreds of billions of years or even trillions of years. The fact that they could become a level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator meant that they had unimaginably powerful luck, which meant that their own luck was much more influential than that of ordinary cultivators in the long river of luck. Although this influence was still insignificant compared to the long river of luck, after understanding this, Luo Fan naturally would not reject this method. What the Book Supreme wanted them to do was to influence the river of luck, but he did not say how. You could wholeheartedly help Wu Zun and the others fuse their luck, but you could also adjust your own luck and even think of ways to reduce the influence of the river of luck on you. Compared to other places, because there were many level 9 pseudo saint-level cultivators doing the same thing here, it would naturally form a trend and greatly increase the success rate. Why wouldn't they do it? After understanding this, Luo Fan did not hesitate. He raised his hand and slapped the void. In an instant, the power in his body underwent a mysterious change, instantly turning into an extremely strange, invisible existence that slapped the void in front of him. If the energy used in this slap were to explode, it would be enough to destroy a great kiliocosm. However, at this moment, under the effect of this mystic ability, this slap did not affect the surrounding space-time at all. As all the power was greatly consumed, the point on the river of luck that he had already seen and was connected to him suddenly started to tremble slightly. This tremble was so powerful that it even caused slight ripples on the surface of the river of luck. If the river of luck had such a ripple, then the change in Luo Fan's luck, which was connected to this point, would naturally be even greater. Under this influence, Luo Fan's entire body started to tremble violently. Every space-time in his body was like the seawater on the waves, jumping up and down in a frenzy. At the same time, a mystic ability was slapped on the river of luck. Then, hundreds of strange spots appeared on the river of luck. At the same time, hundreds of ripples appeared around those spots. These bright spots were scattered all over the Luck Dao River, but under the effect of this divine ability, the junior brothers shot out like a hurricane and quickly projected themselves in front of everyone. It looked like they were all squeezed into this hall. However, everyone present knew that this was not the truth. Those dots were still scattered all over the entire river of luck. However, under the effect of the mystic ability, they were projected in front of everyone because of the existence of everyone. That was why they appeared in this hall, but not because they were really close to each other. Everyone obtained different divine abilities, but they were all similar in nature. They were all existences that could adjust their luck according to their will. Needless to say, Luo Fan's adjustment of his own fate was to naturally use this mystic ability to weaken the connection between him and the river of luck. Amidst the unimaginable tremors, Luo Fan's fate gradually separated from the spot on the river of luck that represented his fate. In other words, the ribbon that represented Luo Fan's fate became dimmer and dimmer as the tremors went on. This had a huge impact on Luo Fan. His entire body collapsed tens of millions of times in an instant. Every time, his body seemed to have completely collapsed into the tiniest speck of dust. But every time, it would condense again under the pressure of his own unfathomable cultivation level, and once again form his body. This was Luo Fan's choice. However, the other level, 9 pseudo-saints weren't like this. Those cultivators, almost all of them used this mystic ability to adjust their own fate, allowing their own fate to continuously increase. Shifting one's luck path to the connection point of the river of luck path represented luck. It represented the position of fortune equal to heaven. These level 9 pseudo-saints. They were born in the demon realm and grew up in the demon realm. To them, the saints of the demon realm, they were their role models. In fact, even the saints of the demon realm seemed to need to fight, and there seemed to be things like opportunities. Therefore, in their opinion, even the saints of the demon realm were under the control of the river of luck. Under such circumstances, they naturally didn't have a strong desire to transcend the river of luck like Luo Fan. To them, using the river of luck to obtain better fate, obtain more opportunities, and even obtain the opportunity to become a saint. That was the best choice. The relationship between using the river of luck to obtain better fate and breaking away from the River of Luck was like the relationship between an official abusing his power for personal gain and directly betraying the country. Obviously, for the River of Luck, the former was just a scabbard. If it was in a bad mood, it would care about it. If it was in a good mood, it would turn a blind eye. As for the latter, it was an intolerable betrayal. No matter what mood it was in, it would definitely not let it go. Hence, what Luo Fan was doing and what those level 9 pseudo-sage cultivators were doing produced two completely different results at this moment. Luo Fan wanted to break away from the River of Luck. Although the ripples in the River of Luck were far less than the movement of the level 9 pseudo-saints, the reaction of the River of Luck was much greater than the reaction of the level 9 pseudo-saints combined. However, the reaction of the River of Luck was much greater than the reaction of the hundreds of level 9 pseudo-saints combined. At this moment, the entire River of Luck seemed to be enraged as it began to shake violently. A formless majesty was emitted from the River of Luck and descended upon the hall. More specifically, it descended upon Luo Fan's body. The power of this might had already reached an unimaginable level. It had materialized from nothingness, causing the entire hall to feel as if time had stopped in that instant. Everything seemed to have turned into black and white. At this moment, Luo Fan felt that he was being stared at by some unimaginably terrifying existence. In a trance, he had a strong premonition that in the next moment, his entire existence would be erased. Whether it was the present, the past, or the future, even the memories of all living beings, and so on and so forth, everything would be erased. This feeling was even more dangerous and terrifying than when he had been stared at by a saint. At this moment, Luo Fan knew that he had angered the River of Luck. Instinctively, he stimulated the essence of his cultivation that he had obtained, which seemed like a saint's intent, and wrapped it around his entire body. The moment this intent appeared, the terrifying majesty was suddenly isolated. An extremely strange force directly acted on his will, and even directly dispersed his will, causing the will that he had painstakingly condensed to collapse in an instant, and his body was instantly crushed into minced meat at this moment. After doing all this, the majesty completely disappeared without a trace, as if he had never appeared before. Then, it was as if time had reversed for Luo Fan, who had already been turned into minced meat, and all the minced meat shifted. Like a sandman built from sand, it began to condense into a living Luo Fan, who reappeared in the palace. I finally blocked it. That was close. Luo Fan let out a long breath and smiled faintly. He raised his head and looked at the River of Luck that filled the entire palace. He saw that the point that he represented in the River of Luck had become more than twice as weak as before. He heaved a huge sigh of relief in his heart. At this moment, the will that he had shattered just now condensed and reappeared once again. In the blink of an eye, it was as if it had never been shattered at all, and it wrapped around his entire body. If Luo Fan's intent had been bestowed by another level, 9 saint, or if he had obtained it after failing to break through to the saint realm, then, after this intent had been shattered just now, he would have completely lost it and would never be able to obtain it again. However, it was obvious that Luo Fan's intent was not obtained in this way. His will was obtained because he had stimulated the essence of his cultivation. It was just an additional thing brought about by the essence of his cultivation. As long as his cultivation essence did not change, it was not destroyed. Even if this intent was destroyed countless times, it would be able to recover in an instant. However, it would not be lost just because it collapsed once. On the contrary, it might even become more condensed because of this collapse and destruction. It would become pure in the appearance of this intent. In an instant, many of the level 9 saints present focused their attention on Luo Fan. Luo Fan knew that this intent was not the holy will. However, it contained the mystery of the holy will. In the eyes of the other cultivators, this was the holy will. It was not surprising that a level 9 saint had a holy will. At most, it would make people marvel at the opportunity of this level 9 saint. They would marvel at its power. However, a level 5 saint actually had a holy will. This was simply like a child wearing golden armor and swaggering through the streets. It made many level 9 saints have all kinds of thoughts in an instant. In particular, the scene of Luo Fan being crushed into meat paste and taking a long time to recover made them look down on Luo Fan even more. They did not know that the majesty just now was completely targeted at Luo Fan. They did not know that the majesty that Luo Fan had encountered was countless times stronger than the majesty they had felt. They only knew that Luo Fan had actually performed so badly after encountering a majesty that could recover very quickly. Even his body had been crushed into meat paste. The gap between them and Luo Fan made them feel that they were insulting themselves by standing with Luo Fan. Among them, there were many level 9 saints who were secretly delighted. They felt that the river of luck path was indeed efficacious. They had just changed their luck path, and good luck had actually come. A holy will had actually been sent to them. With this thought, the level 9 saints felt even more anxious about the holy will from Luo Fan. At this moment, the bookmaster's laughter came from the void. "Thank you, fellow Taoists, for your help." As he spoke, all the stars in the vast thousand world, which was also all the medium-sized worlds, suddenly collapsed. Endless power was transformed and gathered in this hall in an extremely magical way, converging on the river of luck path. In an instant, the scattered points of Wu Zun and his confidant's luck path rushed across an infinite distance. Like a comet crashing into the earth, they collided and merged completely, turning into a point that was 10 times bigger than the original point. So, the luck fusion is successful. In an instant, all the class 9 pseudo-sages in the hall understood what was going on. Looking at the changes on the river of luck path, Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh. Indeed, the luck fusion is not the right way. After the luck path of Wu Zun and the others merged, the point was 10 times bigger than the original point. This was not just useful on the surface. In fact, the fact that the point was 10 times bigger meant that the connection between them and the river of luck path was 10 times closer. This tightness allowed them to obtain more than 10 times the luck under the control of the river of luck path. But at the same time, it made it more than 10 times more difficult for them to surpass the river of luck path. Perhaps such an outcome was what many level 9 pseudo-sanctuary powerhouses in the demon realm pursued. But for Luo Fan, the last point alone was unacceptable to him. The expressions of Wu Zun and the others all changed at this moment. They seemed to be in a trance and somewhat at a loss. Then, the auras of the 10 of them resonated with each other and gradually merged. Chapter 1391. With such a change, the river of luck suddenly shook violently. It looked like a horrifying snake that had suffered a terrible injury and was struggling frantically. Under the shaking of the river of luck, the entire vast thousand world was suddenly filled with countless cracks. Then the cracks became bigger and bigger. In the blink of an eye, they completely collapsed and turned into countless fragments of time and space. They were gradually eroded by the void and became finer and finer until they could no longer be found. In the blink of an eye, such a vast world had actually disappeared in front of everyone. Such a huge change happened so quickly and strangely that almost no one could react. Fortunately, the cultivators in this world were all level 9 pseudo-sage cultivators. Even Luo Fan, who was not a level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator, had power that ordinary level 9 pseudo-sage cultivators could not compare to. Therefore, such a sudden change in this world did not cause any casualties. At this moment, everyone was shrouded by time and space. If this place was in a state of primal chaos and the world was destroyed, no matter how powerful these people were, they would not be able to resist in this unimaginable world. They would be instantly devoured by the state of primal chaos, and their lives would be completely taken away. However, this was not a state of chaos. It was just a void between time and space. In this place, the space-time that they had created was already able to defend against the invasion of the void. In an instant, in the void after the world was destroyed, it was replaced by more than 200 different time and space. Then, The figure of the Book Supreme appeared in the void. He raised his hand and punched out. In an instant, there was a space-time tunnel from the void to the demon realm and the island that they were originally on. Thank you, fellow cultivators. Next, we have a banquet to entertain you. I hope that you will do us the honor, the Book Supreme said. This voice contained unparalleled power. It directly penetrated the void and entered the ears of the level 9 pseudo-sage cultivators and Luo Fan in the more than 200 time in space. Facing such a change, everyone naturally agreed with a smile. Then, everyone took a step forward and entered the space-time tunnel with their time and space. One by one, they went through the space-time tunnel and arrived above the island. Among the crowd of cultivators, Luo Fan's performance was the most relaxed among everyone. He didn't even use space-time to resist the invasion of the void. Instead, he used the power of the heavenly cauldron to protect himself. At this moment, the process of getting out of the space-time tunnel was as if nothing had happened. It was easy and comfortable, and it was even more comfortable than going on an outing, because of the will that Luo Fan had displayed previously. Just now, almost all the Class 9 pseudo-sages were paying attention to him. Seeing the changes that had happened to him and the power he displayed was even more mysterious than theirs. More than half of the Class 9 pseudo-sages gave up on the idea of dealing with Luo Fan. Although the Emperor's will was good, it was not as important as his own life. Since the other party was able to do what he was unable to do, at the very least, it meant that the other party was stronger than him in this aspect. If that was the case, he might be able to defeat the other party easily, but if he was not careful, he could very well be the one to suffer a loss. For the sake of this holy decree, there was no need for them to risk their lives. Of course, in addition to these rational Class 9 pseudo-sages, there were almost as many Class 9 pseudo-sages who were still full of confidence and did not think that Luo Fan could cause them any trouble. In contrast, they seemed to be more concerned about the other Class 9 pseudo-sages. They were secretly calculating how to gain the upper hand in the competition with the other Class 9 pseudo-sages and obtain the final victory. After knowing that everyone was plotting against him, Luo Fan had already been paying attention to the expressions of all the Class 9 pseudo-sages present. The change in everyone's mentality was instantly grasped by him. He couldn't help but smile in his heart, knowing that his special display of strength had already achieved an effect. Dispelling the malice of ordinary people was already a very rare result. After returning to the demon realm, the Book Supreme, Wu Zun, and the others appeared in front of everyone and eagerly invited everyone into a cave residence that they had specially opened to attend a banquet. The banquet of Class 9 pseudo-sages was naturally not a simple banquet. It was of such a high standard that Luo Fan had almost never seen it before. Compared to this kind of banquet, the Flat Peach Feast and other similar gatherings of immortals that he had seen in movies and television before he transmigrated were simply like the banquets of rich people in the countryside. There were all kinds of magical things and all kinds of incredible treasures piled up everywhere. The entire banquet place was filled with extremely rich, chaotic energy. During this period, there were even all kinds of strange worlds that naturally evolved. There were even people performing all kinds of divine powers that were close to Tao, displaying all kinds of mysteries of the Great Way that could not be described in words. Luo Fan seemed very calm in this banquet. He just quietly admired and enjoyed, but he was not as active as the other Class 9 pseudo-sages. On the third day of the banquet, a Class 9 pseudo-sage named Pagoda Venerable said to Luo Fan with a smile, "Is this the first time that you have attended such a banquet?" Luo Fan glanced at this person and recalled for a while. He knew that this person was one of those Class 9 pseudo-sages who still wanted to deal with him after witnessing his power. He couldn't help but smile faintly and said, "Yes, this is the first time that I have attended a banquet of this level. After all, my cultivation is only at Class 5 pseudo-sages." Ha! If there's a first time, there will naturally be a second time. Now that you have entered this circle, you will definitely attend more and more banquets like this in the future. The Pagoda Venerable laughed loudly. Luo Fan nodded with a smile, but didn't say anything. Since he knew that this person had the intention to deal with him, he naturally didn't want to waste his breath on him. The pagoda venerable didn't mind and said with a smile, "Generally speaking, banquets like this usually have a gambling battle. At such a banquet, there will always be a gambling battle. I wonder if fellow Taoist has the mood to play?" Gambling battle? Luo Fan immediately understood what he meant. He said with a faint smile, "This is my first time attending such a banquet, but I have never heard of such rules." The pagoda venerable laughed. "Ha! It is precisely because I know that you have never attended such a banquet before that I came to tell you. Now that you want to integrate into this circle, it is best that you get used to the rules as soon as possible. I think this is the best way to get used to it. It is to participate in it. If you don't mind, I can help you familiarize yourself with the rules." Hearing this, Luo Fan chuckled and said, "Since it's a bet, there must be something on the line. What is the bet?" The pagoda venerable heard Luo Fan's answer. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he said, "The stakes could be big or small if both parties agree. If both parties agree, it can also be nothing. Since we are gambling to help you familiarize yourself with the rules, why don't we not make any bets?" Luo Fan shook his head in a serious manner and said, "How can this be? Since we want to familiarize ourselves with the rules, of course we should follow the most common ones. Let's bet on something else." The pagoda venerable looked at Luo Fan calmly, but his eyes shone as if he was looking at a fool who was throwing his life away. He smiled. "If that is what you think, then let's make a bet. I wonder what you're going to bet. How about we bet our lives?" Luo Fan said with a smile, "Bet our lives." The pagoda venerable's expression stiffened. He looked at Luo Fan with a sharp look in his eyes. His aura erupted uncontrollably, causing the surrounding space to tremble slightly. Luo Fan's face was expressionless. He looked at the pagoda venerable quietly and waited for the pagoda venerable's answer. Anyone who could cultivate to the level 9 False Sage realm was definitely not stupid. Luo Fan's reply made the pagoda venerable understand that his intentions had been completely seen through by Luo Fan. The smile on his face gradually disappeared. "All right, if you want to bet your life, then I'll bet with you. Let me see how a mere 5th level sage like you could defeat the holy intent." The pagoda venerable said coldly. "Ha ha ha." Luo Fan suddenly burst into laughter. Their conversation wasn't too loud, and the banquet was so lively, so no one noticed their conversation. However, at this moment, Luo Fan suddenly burst into laughter. The natural power in his voice shook the cave abode, causing all the level 9 pseudo-sage cultivators attending the banquet to notice the abnormality in this location. Luo Fan laughed for a while and said to the crowd, "I heard that banquets of this level will have gambling battles. Therefore, I plan to have a gambling battle with Pagoda Venerable today." Gambling battle? That's great. As expected, a banquet with gambling battles is a wonderful banquet. Wu Zun burst into laughter. As a level 9 pseudo-sage who had just successfully fused with the other 9 level 9 pseudo-sages, Wu Zun was now like a bridegroom. His entire mood was exuding joy and happiness from the inside out, but he always thought of everything in a positive light. When he heard Luo Fan mention the battle, he simply thought that it was just an ordinary battle. Of course, he laughed out loud and agreed. However, this did not mean that everyone else felt the same way. The Remnant Venerables said, "Fellow Taoist, this is your first time attending a banquet of this level. It's better not to have a gambling battle for now. How about you come and have a gambling battle when you are familiar with this banquet in the future?" The book Venerable also interrupted. "That's right. Although there will be a battlefield created by the people of the banquet, it is absolutely possible for you to suffer injuries that are difficult to recover from. You don't have any experience and don't know how to avoid incurring injuries in a gambling battle. It's really not suitable for you to participate in a gambling battle. I think it's better for you to have a gambling battle in the future after you have seen more gambling battles." Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, "Fellow Taoists, don't worry. The gambling battle between me and fellow Taoist Pagoda Venerable doesn't require any gambling battle experience. As long as you have the strength, you can do it, because we are gambling not on anything else but our lives. Hearing this, the entire banquet venue, which was also this strange cave abode, fell silent. As mentioned earlier, none of those who were able to become a level 9 false saint were stupid. Obviously, everyone present was sharp-eyed, who could hide their thoughts from others. Hearing what Luo Fan said, in an instant, everyone knew what was going on. They all understood why such a thing had happened. The remnant venerable, the book venerable, and the others' expressions became extremely ugly. Although their friendship with Luo Fan was not deep, it was not deep enough for them to entrust their lives to him. But no matter what, Luo Fan had revealed the fact that he had the holy will because he had helped them. And now, because of this holy will, Luo Fan was targeted by other 9th level sages and was forced to have a gambling battle of life and death. No matter what, this was a slap to their faces. No matter what, it was a slap to their faces. They were slapped in the face. It would be strange if they could look good. The remnant venerable, the book venerable, and the others' expressions were extremely ugly. However, the pagoda venerable, who saw their expressions, didn't care at all. He just stood there quietly. He looked at Luo Fan coldly. He seemed to be adjusting his state of mind. He was ready to completely erase this person in front of him. The pagoda venerable had cultivated for trillions of years. Seriously speaking, he was actually a cultivator of the same generation as the book venerable and the remnant venerable's master, the 9th level sages with 9 holy wills. Even, his cultivation level was far higher than that 9th level sages for a period of time. With such an identity, he didn't even care about 9th level sages with 9 holy wills, let alone the book venerable and the other juniors. The reason why he came back to participate in the fate fusion ceremony that the book supreme and the others were going to carry out was because of the benefits of this fate fusion. He didn't care much about the book venerable and the others. With such a mentality, it would be strange if he cared about the book venerable and the others' expressions. Although the book venerable and the remnant venerable's expressions were extremely ugly, as the pagoda venerable had said, such a banquet originally had such a rule. There was a tradition of betting once or twice. Based on such a rule and tradition, although it seemed a little excessive for Luo Fan and the pagoda venerable to bet their lives, and the stakes were indeed a little high, it was still in line with the rules. As the organizers of this banquet, they couldn't stop it. Therefore, even though they were extremely unhappy, they had to organize everyone to create a battlefield in this cave mansion for Luo Fan and the pagoda venerable to bet their lives. All the cultivators present had participated in such banquets many times. No one was unfamiliar with the structure of the gambling battlefield. Soon, such a battlefield was opened up by them. This battlefield was a world of nothingness, a world of nothingness that seemed to be completely boundless, a world of nothingness. With the support of over 200 9th level sages, such a boundless world had become extremely sturdy, even sturdier than the demon realm. The sturdiness of the space and the stability of time had reached an unimaginable level. If such a world could collide with the demon realm, it would definitely be the demon realm that would be destroyed, not such a world. This was what the battlefield of the battle looked like. 4 9th level sages, they could create everything they needed by themselves. Even the yuan qi and power they needed for cultivation and battle could be created out of thin air. Therefore, any kind of environment and any kind of battlefield was meaningless to a level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator. What they needed was a battlefield that could support the eruption of their power. In other words, a place where they could fight to their heart's content without worrying about the outside world being affected or causing irreparable damage to the outside world. Therefore, for them, what they needed to fight was an extremely sturdy and powerful world of nothingness. After the world was created, the book Venerable said, "Since this is the first time that Taoist Luo Fan is participating in the battle, I will repeat the rules of the battle. In the gambling battle, all methods and magic treasures could be used. Both sides of the gambling battle didn't need to care about anything and didn't need to worry about anything. They can do whatever they want, and the consequences will be dealt with by the cultivators watching the battle. As for the cultivators watching the battle, because they can witness an exciting battle, They have to use all means to prevent the aftermath of the battle from affecting the outside world, so that all the damage of the battle will be confined to the battlefield. When one of the two parties is about to die, they have the obligation to protect that person, to avoid the death of any one of the two parties. After saying that, the book Venerable glanced at the pagoda Venerable and said, "Although the two of you are betting your lives in this battle, however, the rules of the battle are the rules. During the battle, we will also protect the person whose life is in danger at any time. During the battle, no one of the two parties will die. As for who wins and who loses, and who wants whose life, that will have to wait until after the wager battle to discuss and settle it yourselves." These words seem to be directed at the two of them, but in fact they were directed at the pagoda Venerable, because the book Venerable was confident that Luo Fan could win. He didn't have much confidence. Although the pagoda Venerable had slapped them in the face, the book Venerable also knew how powerful the pagoda Venerable was. Although he hadn't reached the saint state yet, compared to them, he wasn't any weaker. Furthermore, because he had lived for a long time, he had more experience. In some aspects, he was stronger than them. In his opinion, even if Luo Fan had a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure and the holy decree, it would still be difficult for him to defeat him. Therefore, what he said was that in the battle between the two of them, they would intervene if one of them lost. However, it was more to remind the pagoda Venerable that they were very unhappy and would definitely not let the pagoda Venerable get what he wanted. The moment the pagoda Venerable defeated Luo Fan, they would intervene and save Luo Fan. They might even let Luo Fan escape by himself after the battle. When the pagoda Venerable heard this, his face darkened. Since that's the case, it seems that we have to be careful lest someone dies, the pagoda Venerable said faintly. These words obviously meant that he had to be careful when he made his move. He would certainly not give the Book Supreme and the others a chance. He would certainly kill Luo Fan before the Book Supreme and the others could react and complete the bet of his life. Obviously, he didn't think highly of Luo Fan's strength and thought that Luo Fan would definitely not win. This situation seemed strange. After all, Luo Fan had taken the initiative to say that he would bet his life, which meant that he was quite confident. They should have been more vigilant and not think that it was impossible for Luo Fan to win. The reason for this was very simple. It was the arrogance of these level 9 pseudo-sage. It was not the arrogance of themselves, but the arrogance of the level 9 pseudo-sage realm. To them, no matter how strong Luo Fan was, no matter how strong he was, and no matter how strong he was, they would never think that Luo Fan could truly understand the mysteries of level 9 pseudo-sage. They would only think that the reason why Luo Fan was so confident was that he did not truly understand the power of the level 9 pseudo-sage realm. He had wrongly overestimated his own strength and underestimated the power that a level 9 pseudo-sage could unleash. Luo Fan looked at the performance of these people. Both his face and heart were extremely calm. Even when he had just attained the earthly immortal realm and become an itinerant immortal, he was able to ignore the gazes of others. Moreover, he was now a level 5 pseudo-sage and had comprehended the essence of his cultivation. He had broken through all the bottlenecks above level 5 pseudo-sage and below the sage realm. Everyone looked down on him, thought that he was arrogant, but to him, it was like a spring breeze caressing his face. They were billions of light years away from moving him. The book master and the pagoda master looked at each other. Both of them were extremely determined, and neither of them would give in to the other. The expressions of the more than 200 level 9 pseudo-sage practitioners who attended the banquet were also different. Some of them looked curious, as if they were looking forward to how exciting the battle would be. But most of them looked annoyed, as if they regretted not being the pagoda master and not having the pagoda master to fight with Luo Fan immediately. Those who looked curious were obviously the level 9 pseudo-sage practitioners who had given up on the idea of dealing with Luo Fan and given up on the holy decree on Luo Fan. And those who looked annoyed were naturally those who were still thinking about the holy decree and had planned to find a chance to deal with Luo Fan after leaving this place, and snatched the holy decree to deal with the level 9 pseudo-sage. For them, there was no suspense at all in this battle. The Pagoda Master would definitely win and obtain the holy decree, and then completely kill that arrogant Luo Fan. Chapter 1392. Luo Fan smiled and took a step forward, directly entering the incomparably sturdy world of nothingness. The Pagoda Venerate's movements were not slow either. After Luo Fan entered, he quickly appeared in the world of nothingness and quietly floated in front of Luo Fan. Today, let me tell you how powerful a true level 9 pseudo-sage is. You are not a true level 9 pseudo-sage unless you possess some level 9 pseudo-sage treasures, the Pagoda Venerate said faintly as he looked at Luo Fan. Luo Fan looked at the Pagoda Venerate and shook his head. What's the point of saying this now? We are gambling with our lives now. After saying that, Luo Fan raised his hand and pointed a finger. In an instant, the heavenly cauldron appeared above his head and slowly floated up and down. A mysterious suppressive force was emitted from the heavenly cauldron, causing the entire world of nothingness to undergo subtle changes. Faintly, even the laws of the world seemed to be completely suppressed and suppressed. The entire world seemed to have become the suppressive world of the heavenly cauldron. The Pagoda Venerate sneered when he saw this. He raised his hand and pointed. In an instant, an 18-story pagoda appeared above his head. This pagoda had a mysterious yellow luster and looked extremely noble and mysterious. As soon as it appeared, it naturally emitted an eternal charm. Even the suppressive force emitted by the divine sky cauldron seemed to be repelled by the aura emitted by the pagoda. A full half of the world was taken over by the pagoda. The two were separated by the center between Luo Fan and the Pagoda Venerate, each occupying half of the world. The Pagoda Venerate frowned. Clearly, the current situation had exceeded his expectations. One should know that he was extremely proud of his own cultivation realm. In his opinion, Luo Fan was only a level 5 pseudo-sage. No matter how strong the power or how profound the techniques he mastered, how could he compare to himself? When Luo Fan used a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure, the Pagoda Venerate also used a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure. Normally, he should have used absolute strength to crush Luo Fan. Everything that Luo Fan had grasped should be completely destroyed. Now, in this stalemate situation, obviously, he hadn't thought of this before. Even so, the Pagoda Venerable was only slightly surprised. His confidence would not be destroyed so easily. He looked at Luo Fan. The magic treasure is not bad. No wonder you are so confident. However, magic treasures were just magic treasures. Only the cultivation experience could truly belong to oneself. It was the only thing that could prove one's Tao and become a saint. You're still far from it. Saying, the black and yellow pagoda above his head shook slightly, and suddenly, a stream of black and yellow chi gushed out. In an instant, hundreds of millions of blades appeared in the void, and in an instant, they rushed towards Luo Fan. Like a long river, they wanted to wash Luo Fan into pieces. In the face of such a situation, Luo Fan smiled faintly. With a pat of his hand, the suppressive power of the divine court heavenly cauldron suddenly turned into a palm that slapped forward. The countless blades formed from the chi of heaven and earth crumbled in an instant. All the blades turned back into chi of heaven and earth. They were even slapped by the palm, forming the silhouette of a palm. It was fixed in the void, unable to move. The amount of heaven and earth chi was simply too much, and the palm was simply too big. In this way, a vast continent was created in the void. This black and yellow chi was a kind of power that had been refined by the black and yellow pagoda. In itself, its quality was higher than that of the chaotic energy. It could even be said that it was an attempt to transform the origin energy into the chaotic state, but it could evolve and create all things. After being slapped into a continent, this continent naturally evolved into all kinds of strange things. Mountains, rivers, plains, hills, grasslands, forests, and even many flowers and plants, insects, fish, birds, beasts, and so on. All kinds of creatures, whether strong or weak, intelligent or not, only had instincts, began to appear on this continent. They began to grow at an extremely shocking speed. Both Luo Fan and the Pagoda Venerate did not care about what was happening on this continent. They allowed this continent to wildly accelerate time according to its own nature. In almost an instant, time on this continent had developed for billions of years. In the blink of an eye, many waves of creatures had changed. There were even many creatures that turned into powerful cultivators and began to pursue transcendence from this continent. They began to pursue the truth of the world, and they began to want to obtain the eternal and inextinguishable Saint Realm. Just as they were pursuing each other, Luo Fan and the Pagoda Venerable had already exchanged countless blows. Although the Pagoda Venerate used different techniques each time, the special characteristics of the black and yellow pagoda caused the power that the Pagoda Venerate used to contain the black and yellow chi. When the black and yellow chi encountered the suppressive power of the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron, the result was obvious. Almost every attack of the Pagoda Venerate was directly suppressed by the power of the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron and turned into pieces of various types of continents. Some were large, some were small, some were fast, some were slow, and some were strong. These pieces of continents began to scatter in this world of nothingness, decorating this world of nothingness into a continent with countless creatures. A world that contained endless vitality. For the creatures born on the continents were the entire world to them. After they left that world, they would discover that their original continents were just an extremely small place. In the entire world, apart from their own world, there were even more terrifying continents and more worlds. Moreover, to them, these worlds were constantly being born and their numbers were increasing. To them, it was as if the real universe had appeared in front of them. Due to the extremely fast flow of time, tens of thousands of years or even hundreds of millions of years had passed in the outside world in the eyes of the creatures on the continents. Gradually, the countless continents that were born from the black and yellow chi that Luo Fan had suppressed were divided into different levels by the creatures that had transcended their original continents. Some of these continents had even directly formed the immortal realm. The creatures that had transcended their original continents entered the immortal realm and the divine realm and began to enjoy the beauty of endless time. They began to compete with each other. They began to open up a cultivation route that led to a higher path in this impossible situation, and so on and so forth. However, in the end, this entire world of nothingness had unknowingly formed an incomparably complete cultivation universe, apart from Luo Fan and the Pagoda Venerable. Everything that happened in this world of nothingness, outside this world of nothingness, the many level 9 pseudo-saints who had constructed this world of nothingness were all watching. Most of them were more concerned about the battle between Luo Fan and the Pagoda Venerable. However, some of them had different interests. They were more concerned about the creatures that had been born from the continents that the two of them had created. They were more concerned about the rather interesting cultivation universe that had been born naturally. Actually, I'm more interested in the battle between the two of them. I want to know how far that cultivation universe can develop. A level 9 pseudo-saint suddenly said to his companion beside him, you also care more about them? I thought I was the only one. His companion said in surprise. Following this, the other level 9 pseudo-saints also unknowingly shifted their attention to those worlds. All of a sudden, the shining spots in those worlds began to enter their eyes. The book Venerable laughed at this moment. Interesting indeed. The cultivator who first created the concept of the immortal realm is quite interesting. If we train him a little, he might even be able to become a pseudo-saint. Isn't that a little exaggerated, eldest senior brother? The remnant Venerable laughed at this moment. After watching the battle between Luo Fan and the Pagoda Venerable, he had some confidence in Luo Fan's strength. The gloominess of being slapped in the face by the Pagoda Venerable had dissipated a lot. Faintly, he felt like he was watching the Pagoda Venerable kick a rock. so he was in the mood to pay attention to other things. The book Venerable said, "It's not exaggerated at all. To us, that little bit of time was only a few breaths of time, but to that person, it was 3 trillion years. During such a long time, this creature could maintain his Tao heart and pursue the path ahead wholeheartedly. With this kind of willpower, as long as he is given a chance, he will definitely soar into the sky. The reason why he is limited to the Khanate, Zenith Heaven, and can't transcend is that Taoist Luo Fan and the others created them too casually and didn't build a complete great Tao for those continents." At the side, Wu Zun laughed and said, "Since eldest senior brother thinks so highly of this creature, why don't you guide him out and let him be your disciple?" Compared to the book Venerable and the remnant Venerable, Wu Zun and Luo Fan didn't have a deep friendship. In any case, Luo Fan revealed the fact that he had the holy will because of him. Therefore, he was even more displeased with Luo Fan's experience. So he always wanted to teach the Pagoda Venerable a lesson. How could the book Venerable not know his many junior brothers? As soon as Wu Zun said this, he knew what he was thinking. He couldn't help but laugh and say, "I'll give him a chance." Then he raised his hand and pointed at the void world. In an instant, in the immortal realm of the void world, the most powerful cultivator who controlled the entire immortal realm and was revered as the immortal emperor by many creatures on these continents felt his vision blur. Then his perspective suddenly rose up. In an instant, he broke through his own time dimension and the limitations of the strange cultivation universe. From a macroscopic perspective, he saw the battle that was happening in the world of nothingness. He also saw how the worlds he was born in were born, and he also saw what was going on in the immortal realm that he was so proud of controlling. In an instant, the immortal emperor felt as if he was struck by lightning. He suddenly realized how insignificant he was. He suddenly understood that in his eyes, the entire universe, the existence of the entire world, was so insignificant and so fragile. He understood how great and vast the door in front of him that he hadn't opened was. Although it was only a short moment, it was tens of thousands of years in that world. When the immortal emperor came back to his senses, the situation in his cultivation universe had changed greatly. He had become a legendary figure, and the celestial dynasty he established had become an imperial dynasty in ancient myths and legends. As for himself, according to the legends, he had died countless times in all sorts of ways. This shocking contrast instantly made the immortal emperor make up his mind. He began to use his own power to refine his foundation bit by bit and refine the essence of life he had obtained from the mysterious yellow chi. Then he gradually transcended and sublimated. A few breaths in the outside world were billions of years in the cultivation universe. The immortal emperor. Finally, he completely broke away from the mysterious yellow chi he had obtained. He transcended his own will. The moment his will transcended, the immortal emperor used his own power to break through his own time dimension. He truly stepped into the same time dimension as Luo Fan and the others. As he rushed up, he turned into a small figure and floated among the countless mysterious yellow continents that filled the entire void world. At this moment, a voice entered the immortal emperor's ears. "Have you finally transcended? Only then are you qualified to be my disciple." Along with this voice, the celestial emperor suddenly felt a strange suction force acting on his body and pulling him in. In an instant, he had transcended this vast and magnificent world and arrived in a universe that he could not even imagine in his most absurd dreams. He was being stared at by an existence that could create billions of worlds with just its aura. At this moment, a great existence raised his hand and pointed at him. He instantly found that he had a body that was billions of times more powerful than his previous mysterious yellow body, a body that was billions of times more real. The moment he had this body, the immortal emperor suddenly felt that everything was worth it. He had abandoned all his power in the cultivation universe, abandoned all his status, and spent billions of years to transcend. It was all worth it, even if it was just for this 1 second, Even if he was beaten back to his original form in the next second, it was all worth it. Realizing this, the immortal emperor burst into tears. He knelt down in front of the great existence and said, "Thank you, teacher." The book Venerable looked at the young man who looked like he was 18 or 19 years old, kneeling on the ground with tears on his face and calling him teacher. The book Venerable was even more satisfied. Although he had taken a fancy to this person and wanted to take him in as a disciple, he naturally couldn't take him in when the essence of this person's life was still heaven and earth chi. If that was the case, what was the difference between taking in the pagoda Venerable saliva and excrement? Only when this person truly transcended and refined the essence of his will, when he was no longer a part of pagoda Venerable, could the book Venerable take him in as his disciple. Previously, the book Venerable pulled this immortal emperor out of his own time dimension and perspective to see if he could have a firm heart to abandon everything and truly transcend his own will. Obviously, the book Venerable was very satisfied with this immortal emperor's performance. "Congratulations, senior brother, on getting such a good disciple," Wu Zun and the remnant Venerable said. Originally, they had instigated the book Supreme to get this person out just to embarrass the pagoda Venerable. However, after seeing the immortal emperor's reaction after knowing the nature of their world, they were very satisfied with the immortal emperor in front of them. They were also happy that the book Supreme could get such a disciple. Taking a disciple wasn't just a small matter like inheriting one's own inheritance. In fact, the most important thing was to find a disciple who had a bright future and the possibility of attaining Tao. Only in this way could they expect this disciple to be able to help them in the future, and they could even hope that this disciple could help them when he surpassed them in the future. This was the essence of taking a disciple. So, to any cultivator, their choice of disciples was naturally those that possessed a firm Tao heart, superb natural talent, and extraordinary comprehension ability. That was their best choice. If someone could not bring them any benefits at first glance and could not help them in the future, why would they waste time and energy to take in such a disciple? But this immortal emperor in front of them, in terms of his Tao heart, was already able to move them and make them think that this person could help them in the future. Of course, it was only a help. As for surpassing them and becoming a sage, although it wasn't completely impossible, the probability was obviously small enough for them to transcend and become a sage themselves. The book Venerable smiled and waved his hand. The immortal emperor couldn't help but stand up. Then the book Venerable said, "It's not good to use your original name, so I will give you another name." It was born from the aftermath of the battle between the pagoda Venerable and Taoist Luo Fan, and it contains mysterious yellow qi. Let's call you Zhan Huang. If you become a level 9 Venerable in the future, maybe you can be called a War Venerable. Zhan Huang was overjoyed when he heard the book Venerable's words. "Thank you, book Venerable." At this time, in the Void World, the battle between Luo Fan and the pagoda Venerable had reached its climax. The current pagoda Venerable no longer dared to look at Luo Fan in the same way as before. He completely regarded Luo Fan as an opponent who could threaten him, and he truly felt Luo Fan's strength. In the previous battle, Luo Fan did not use too many divine abilities. He only used the suppressive ability of the divine court heavenly cauldron. However, although this kind of suppression ability seemed simple, under Luo Fan's use, it was exquisite and peerless. It contained countless mysteries that belonged to a level 9 pseudo-sage. No matter what methods the pagoda Venerable used, the power displayed by the mysterious yellow pagoda was unimaginable. He used the suppressive ability to completely resist it, completely disintegrating the mysteries of a level 9 pseudo-sage, and turning his attack into pieces of land with different natures. This method was obviously not something that could be done by someone who only had the strength of a level 9 pseudo-sage, and not someone who had reached the level 9 pseudo-sage realm. If the pagoda Venerable still dared to look down on Luo Fan after witnessing Luo Fan's methods, he would not be a level 9 pseudo-sage. During the battle, although the pagoda Venerable and Luo Fan were not distracted, They could naturally sense what the Book Venerable was doing to the traces they left behind. When he sensed that the Book Venerable had accepted a disciple in the traces they left behind, Luo Fan only smiled, but the Pagoda Venerable's expression became extremely ugly. The Book Venerable's behavior was simply a slap to his face. He was engaged in a life-and-death battle here, but the other party actually collected the products of his traces so casually. What was the difference between this and treating him as a laborer? He was a level 9 Venerable, and his seniority was even higher than the Book Venerable's master, but he was actually treated as a laborer. What an insult! In an instant, the Pagoda Venerable made up his mind. When he fails to break through to the Sage Realm, I will definitely take revenge. The him in his heart was obviously the Book Venerable's master, the level 9 pseudo-sage who had mastered 9 holy wills. Although he thought that his seniority was higher than that person's, he was not a stupid person after all. He clearly knew that he was no match for that person, and that person could probably destroy him with just one move. Therefore, although he was very impolite, he only thought about it in his heart. He did not dare to attack anyone related to that person while that person was still here. At this time, Luo Fan suddenly said, "My friend, your heart is in a mess." As he spoke, the heavenly cauldron of the divine court suddenly shook and suddenly left the top of Luo Fan's head. It directly transcended time and space, appeared above the Pagoda Venerable's head, and pressed down on him. The Pagoda Venerable was taken aback. The black-yellow pagoda frantically surged out of the black-yellow pagoda and turned into layers of clouds that supported the heavenly cauldron. Unfortunately, because his thoughts were not pure, the power of the black-yellow chi was somewhat impure. It simply could not withstand the suppression of the heavenly cauldron and collapsed layer by layer. As the cauldron continued to approach the Pagoda Venerable's head, the suppressive force continued to increase. Gradually, the Pagoda Venerable felt that his existence was being strongly suppressed, and he felt as if his thoughts were being obstructed. For the Pagoda Venerable, such a situation was simply the most sinister nightmare that could possibly occur. He instantly roared, "You want to suppress me? Dream on." Chapter 1393. Zhan Huang, who was outside the world, couldn't help but cry out in pain when he saw this scene. He already knew the truth about the countless black-yellow continents. He understood that these continents were only born from the aftermath of a battle between two powerful beings. They were insignificant existences. However, no matter what, these continents were the source of his birth. They were all his hometown. Seeing these continents being destroyed in front of him and everything he was very familiar with being destroyed in an instant, one could imagine the anger and hatred in his heart. The targets of his hatred naturally included Luo Fan and the Pagoda Venerable. However, in comparison, he hated the Pagoda Venerable even more. He didn't hate the main body of the suppression force, Luo Fan. This was also very obvious. Zhan Huang had been in charge of the so-called immortal realm for hundreds of millions of years, so he naturally had a lot of knowledge. He could tell at a glance that when Luo Fan used the suppression force on the Pagoda Venerable, he didn't waste any energy at all. Instead, he used the suppression force on any of the other black-yellow continents. The reason why the black-yellow continents were destroyed because of the suppression force was that the Pagoda Venerable had directly leaked the suppression force and turned the countless black-yellow continents into his punching bags. That was why the suppression force acted on those continents, causing them to be completely destroyed and the countless living beings on those continents to perish. Therefore, although he hated Luo Fan, who had released the suppression force, he hated the Pagoda Venerable even more. The book's supreme side. The two of them are gambling with their lives. The Pagoda Venerable is about to be defeated, but I have no choice but to save him. However, if this person isn't willing to hand over his life, I can let you deal the final blow that will cost him his life. Hearing this, Zhan Huang nodded vigorously. "Thank you, Master." On the other side, the Book Supreme had already made the final decision for the Pagoda Venerable. On the other side, the Pagoda Venerable didn't give up on his efforts. The black-yellow pagoda above his head crazily emitted black-yellow chi, which turned into layers of defense. It blocked Luo Fan's divine court heavenly cauldron, making it extremely difficult for the divine court heavenly cauldron to press down. The waves of suppressive power penetrated the divine court heavenly cauldron's defenses and entered the pagoda venerate's body. He wanted to completely suppress it. The pagoda venerable continued to use the same methods to deal with this suppressive force. This time, he didn't just use the heaven and earth chi left over from their previous battle as a punching bag. Instead, he used the entire void as a punching bag. The suppressive power was directly applied to the void world, causing the time, space, and nomological laws of the void world to collapse. Under the suppression of this suppressive power, it was as if all vitality had been completely suppressed. Unfortunately, such a method was indeed effective against the suppressive power. However, it was nothing to the main body of the heavenly cauldron of the divine court. The divine court heavenly cauldron continued to press down and approach the pagoda venerate. The pagoda venerate had countless abilities and methods. The power and profoundness of his abilities were enough to show disdain for most of the world. However, in the face of Luo Fan's divine hall heavenly cauldron, which was almost barbaric and tyrannical, his countless methods had no effect at all. He could only watch helplessly as the divine hall heavenly cauldron approached his head. He could only watch as the divine hall heavenly cauldron pressed down on his body bit by bit, wanting to directly suppress him. The pagoda venerate's expression was extremely ugly. Although he didn't show any signs of discouragement or fear, cold sweat, which he originally thought would never appear, started to seep out of his body. Luo Fan wasn't having it easy either. Although the divine court heavenly cauldron was the one that was exerting its strength, he still had to expend a lot of energy to control the divine court heavenly cauldron to resist the pagoda venerate's counterattacks and control the power of the divine court heavenly cauldron to carry out countless subtle and mysterious changes. Every single one of these required him to give it his all in order to achieve it. It was easy to imagine how much pressure he was under when they appeared at the same time. That was why, even though he was just floating in the distance and seemed to be continuously activating his enchanted treasure, he still looked extremely nervous. His expression was serious, and as the power in his body surged, waves of strange ripples spilled out from his body. As for the countless mysterious yellow continents that had been destroyed in this empty world, he didn't care about them at all. For someone like him, who could create countless worlds with a wave of his hand, the continents created by the aftermath of their battle in this empty world were nothing at all. Even though there were countless living beings, countless incredible civilizations, and even powerful cultivators, they were just the aftermath of the battle to him. The destruction of those continents and the death of those living beings could not arouse even the slightest bit of emotion in his heart. This was the mentality of an ordinary pseudo-sane existence. In fact, if it wasn't for the fact that the Book Supreme valued Zhan Huang, even the Book Supreme himself wouldn't think that there was anything wrong with what Luo Fan and the others were doing. In the end, the mysterious yellow chi on the mysterious yellow pagoda couldn't resist the heavenly cauldron of the divine court. Seeing this, the pagoda venerable finally started to use all kinds of divine abilities and powers. His body started to shine with all kinds of mysterious lights, and divine abilities continuously blasted out of his body. Some of them were aimed at the heavenly cauldron of the divine court, while others were aimed at Luo Fan. The power of these divine abilities was extremely mysterious, but in terms of specialized offensive and defensive abilities, they couldn't compare to the changes of the mysterious yellow chi emitted by the mysterious yellow pagoda. At this moment, when he used them, the speed at which the heavenly cauldron of the divine court suddenly increased. However, the pagoda venerable clearly did not place his hopes on the divine court's heaven cauldron's resistance. Instead, he placed his hopes on the divine court's heaven cauldron's damage to Luo Fan's body. However, Luo Fan was obviously guarding against this move. The moment the numerous divine arts enveloped him, his body swayed. all kinds of divine abilities that corresponded to the divine abilities of the pagoda venerable burst out of his body. The profoundness of these divine abilities couldn't compare to the divine abilities of the pagoda venerable. However, these divine abilities contained the will that Luo Fan had comprehended, the will that seemed like the holy decree, but was not the holy decree. The existence of this divine intent directly caused the countless divine abilities to naturally transform in the void. Naturally, there was a sublimation. There was an evolution, and in the end, it was very easy. The divine abilities blocked the countless divine abilities of the pagoda venerable. In the end, the divine abilities formed countless worlds in the void. Countless shadows, countless destruction, countless destruction. Even the traces left behind by the destruction of these divine abilities couldn't be preserved. In the end, they completely disappeared under the suppression of Luo Fan's heavenly cauldron. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared without a trace, as if they had never existed. The power of these divine abilities wasn't too strong for the pagoda venerable himself. In fact, he could even easily teleport them away. However, this didn't mean that the divine abilities of the divine court were ordinary. In fact, for the entire world, to everything in this world of nothingness, this suppressive force was unimaginable. Under the effect of the suppression force for a period of time, the mysterious yellow chi that was compressed into a thin film was directly suppressed into nothingness at this time. It was completely devoured by the various mysteries revealed by the changes of time and space. At this moment, the entire world had completely returned to its original state, completely transformed into absolute nothingness. In other words, at this moment, only Luo Fan, the Tower Venerable, and their magic treasures were left in a world of nothingness. Everything else was empty. No, the pagoda venerable roared. Luo Fan's heavenly cauldron completely suppressed the pagoda venerable and his treasures. This time, Luo Fan was not as gentle as he had been with Xingzun. He pushed the power of the heavenly cauldron to the limit. The terrifying suppressive force even completely suppressed the void and caused countless cracks to appear on the mysterious yellow pagoda. The pagoda venerable's entire body became flattened and elongated. The power in his body was constantly being worn down, squeezed out bit by bit, and then suppressed into time and space. Finally, it completely disappeared and could no longer be found, although this method couldn't completely suppress the pagoda venerable to death. After all, he was a pseudo-saint and wouldn't die so easily. It was enough to destroy the pagoda venerable's foundation. It was enough to damage the pagoda venerable's cultivation realm and damage his strength. If the suppressive force was stronger and lasted longer, perhaps the pagoda venerable's original pseudo-saint strength could be directly suppressed to a pseudo-saint 8th or 7th level. In that case, not only would he become a prey to other pseudo-saints, but he would also no longer be a threat to Luo Fan. When the power in the pagoda venerable's body was suppressed, the outcome of this battle was already extremely clear. If the Book Supreme had been so proactive, he would have been able to directly intervene and rescue the pagoda venerable. There was no doubt that the Book Supreme and the others did not have this ability. After all, they were existences that had created this void world. The level of their strength that they could exert in this void world was absolutely astonishing. It really wasn't too difficult for them to rescue the pagoda venerable. However, it was a pity that the pagoda venerable was now paying the price for not giving the Book Supreme and the others any face. Although the Book Supreme and the others clearly knew that the outcome of the battle had been decided, and that the pagoda venerable would continue to be weakened if this went on, he would eventually be unable to resist Luo Fan and might even lose his life. However, they just watched coldly and no one said anything about rescuing the pagoda venerable. It was as if everything that was happening in front of them was just a scene in a movie. Luo Fan was originally waiting for the Book Supreme and the others to intervene. After waiting for a while, he realized that no one did anything, so he knew what they were thinking. A faint smile appeared on his face as he said, "It seems that Pagoda Venerable is not very popular." How could the Pagoda Venerable have the time to reply to Luo Fan? Right now, he was struggling to find all kinds of ways to escape the fate of being suppressed. He even wanted to fight back against Luo Fan. How could he have the mood to care about what Luo Fan said? The suppression of Luo Fan's Divine Sky Cauldron was obviously not that easy to resist. Under the Divine Sky Cauldron, the Pagoda Venerable struggled and suffered. All his efforts, but it was all for naught. While he was struggling, he could not move at all. The Divine Sky Cauldron did not move at all, and it was unable to release any of its own power. On the contrary, its own willpower and fighting strength were constantly being depleted during this process. As time passed, the resistance he could put up became smaller and smaller. It was getting smaller and smaller. Half a day later, the Pagoda Venerate's body had been suppressed into a thin membrane. In comparison, the black-yellow pagoda was even sturdier. It sank deep into the membrane and was gradually wrapped up by it. In the end, it looked like the Pagoda Venerate had completely fused with the black-yellow pagoda. At this time, the Pagoda Venerable's cultivation level had been suppressed to the border of level 9 pseudo-saint. If this continued, as long as it lowered a little more, the Pagoda Venerable's cultivation level would drop from the 9th level to the 8th level. At this moment, the Pagoda Venerable finally felt fear. An indescribable aura gradually seeped out of the black-yellow pagoda. This aura, it seemed to be fear, remorse, hatred, and begging for mercy. It was so complicated that even Luo Fan could not tell what it was exactly. Luo Fan naturally did not care about such an aura and such emotions. When it came to people who wanted his life, he had always been very ruthless. He maintained the strongest suppressive power of the Heavenly Cauldron, constantly suppressing the Pagoda Venerable, constantly weakening and eliminating everything the Pagoda Venerable had. The Heavenly Cauldron was extremely powerful. Under this suppression, the entire Heavenly Cauldron was filled with strange phenomena. Countless strange lights radiated from the Heavenly Cauldron. Under the power of the Heavenly Cauldron, the entire world of nothingness began to distort and change into all sorts of strange lights and shadows. There were so many scenes that they could not be described with words. Suddenly, a scream came from the black-yellow pagoda that was enveloped by the Pagoda Venerable. Then, Luo Fan felt the Pagoda Venerable's ability to resist suddenly weaken. The black-yellow pagoda was crushed into countless pieces in an instant. All of a sudden, Luo Fan understood. That scream was the Pagoda Venerable's cultivation level being suppressed to the 9th level. He had once again fallen to the 8th level that he had reached countless billions of years ago. His cultivation had dropped to the level 8 pseudo-sage realm. Although it seemed like it was only a drop of one level, however, the impact on one's strength was not as simple as just one level. There was a difference of thousands of times. Furthermore, because his cultivation level had fallen by one level, the Pagoda Venerable's control over his original Dharma treasure, the black-yellow pagoda, had naturally weakened. This weakening had also caused the power of the black-yellow pagoda to decrease. Originally, the black-yellow pagoda had only been able to resist the suppression of the Heavenly Cauldron because it could unleash extremely powerful power. How could it still do the same thing when its power had suddenly been reduced? It was only natural that it would collapse immediately. However, Luo Fan began to frown when he saw this. Although the collapse of the black-yellow pagoda was a good thing for Luo Fan, it also meant that his suppression of the Pagoda Venerable had come to an end. The collapse of the black-yellow pagoda had undoubtedly weakened the Pagoda Venerable's strength. It had weakened the power that he could unleash. However, at the same time, the terrifying power that had been released the moment the black-yellow pagoda had collapsed was enough to form an incomparably powerful defense for the Pagoda Venerable. It was enough for the Pagoda Venerable to rely on its power to resist the suppression of the Heavenly Cauldron. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh when he realized this. He had originally wanted to weaken the Pagoda Venerable as much as possible so that he could be easily wiped out when the Pagoda Venerable was weakened to the limit. However, it seemed like he could only suppress and weaken the Pagoda Venerable to this extent. What a pity. He knew that it would be difficult to produce much of an effect if he continued to suppress it. Luo Fan didn't persist any longer. With a thought, he lifted his hand and pointed. The heavenly cauldron rotated, and the mouth of the cauldron suddenly pointed downwards. The power that had originally been produced began to change from suppression to absorption. The power produced by the collapse of the black-yellow pagoda was stronger than the pagoda itself. However, it had only appeared for a short period of time. Its power couldn't last long. Furthermore, it was difficult to control it as freely as the real black-yellow pagoda. Therefore, under the heavenly cauldron's absorption, the black-yellow chi produced by the black-yellow pagoda turned into a long river of black-yellow. It began to pour into the mouth of the heavenly cauldron. The pagoda venerable was originally in a daze from the suppression. Suddenly, all the suppressive power disappeared. He couldn't help but feel a little confused. It took him a while to come back to his senses. His body condensed in front of Luo Fan again. However, at this time, more than 90% of the power produced by the collapse of the black-yellow pagoda had been absorbed. The shocked pagoda venerable hurriedly controlled the remaining black-yellow chi and turned it back into a black-yellow pagoda. It floated above his head, resisting the suction force. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh inwardly when he saw this. Although the pagoda formed by the black-yellow chi was only a level 8 pseudo-sage treasure, it was still a dharma treasure and already had master. The heavenly cauldron's suction force was powerful, but for an existence of this level, although it had some effect, it couldn't be considered powerful. It was difficult for it to absorb for a while. However, this was enough. After weakening his opponent to this extent, if he used the suppressive power again, the pagoda venerable in front of him would be at his mercy. Thinking of this, Luo Fan smiled and raised his hand to point at the heavenly cauldron. In an instant, the heavenly cauldron turned and its mouth faced up again, pressing down on the pagoda venerable. If it pressed down like this, the pagoda venerable would no longer have any chance. At this point, the pagoda venerable's death was right in front of them. The book supreme and the others, who were outside, couldn't turn a blind eye to it anymore. The book supreme smiled and gestured to the other cultivators. In an instant, the world of nothingness shook slightly. All the power and laws in it changed. A wave of power that could eliminate all power was emitted, greatly reducing the power of Luo Fan's heavenly cauldron. Then, a wave of power grabbed the pagoda venerable's body and the black-yellow pagoda above his head. They disappeared from the world of nothingness. Luo Fan was slightly stunned at first. Then, he suddenly realized that the book supreme and the others, who had been waiting for so long, had finally made their move. With a thought, he raised his hand and clapped. A door appeared in the void. He stepped out and left the world of nothingness. He appeared in the cave residence that the book supreme and the others had prepared. He saw the many level 9 pseudo-sages who had attended the banquet again. This person, could he be one of the creatures from the black-yellow continent? Luo Fan asked in surprise as he looked around and suddenly fixed his eyes on Zhan Huang. Previously, when the book supreme was fishing someone out of the world of nothingness, both Luo Fan and the pagoda venerable had noticed it. But at that time, they were so engrossed in the battle that they didn't pay attention to what kind of person the book supreme was fishing out. At this moment, this was the first time that Luo Fan saw that person. The book supreme smiled and said, "Yes, this person is now my disciple. What do you think?" Although Zhan Huang had a grudge against Luo Fan, he still knew how to be polite. He bowed to Luo Fan and said, "Zhan Huang greets Senior. Thank you for creating me." Luo Fan looked him up and down. He waved his hand slightly to indicate that there was no need for formalities. Then, he nodded and said to the book supreme with a smile, "Not bad, not bad. He has a firm Taoist heart and is a good seedling for cultivation. He is indeed qualified to be your disciple. Congratulations on getting such a good disciple." The book supreme laughed and said, "Haha, this is all thanks to the battle between the two of you. If it weren't for the battle, Zhan Huang wouldn't have been born." Luo Fan laughed and said, "This is fellow Taoist's luck and also his luck." While they were chatting, the pagoda venerable stood at the side with a complicated expression. But between the two of them, Neither of them glanced at the pagoda venerable. It was as if the person standing beside them was transparent and they couldn't see him at all. The pagoda venerable stood in the crowd, but he seemed to be standing alone in a world of nothingness. He suddenly felt an indescribable chill. Chapter 1394. After a while, Luo Fan turned to the pagoda venerable and said, "Fellow cultivator, now that the winner of our duel has been decided, I wonder when you will fulfill your wager?" The pagoda venerable's expression changed drastically. Their previous duel was a bet of their lives. If Luo Fan wanted to collect the wager, didn't that mean he wanted to take his life? As a level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator who had cultivated for trillions of years, he was already used to survival. He had almost completely forgotten that he could also die. He had forgotten that his life could also be taken away by others. Although he seemed angry when he bet his life with Luo Fan, it was more because his dignity had been challenged. He did not think that he would really lose his life like that. At this moment, he suddenly realized that his life was so fragile and that death was right in front of him. After hearing what Luo Fan said, he suddenly realized that his life was so fragile and that death was right in front of him. After realizing this, his originally tranquil state of mind suddenly disappeared and his expression became more and more ugly. He said reluctantly, "I have indeed lost. However, I am willing to use a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure as the wager. What do you think?" Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, "A level 9 pseudo-sage treasure and a level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator. I don't think the value of the two is equal." The pagoda venerable was filled with hope and said, "Although I only have one level 9 pseudo-sage treasure, I can get another one. Why don't I use 2 level 9 pseudo-sage treasures as the wager?" Luo Fan just shook his head and said, "A duel is a duel. The wager has already been agreed upon. If we change it now, it will be disrespectful to this duel, disrespectful to this banquet, and disrespectful to all the cultivators here. Therefore, it's better not to change the wager." The pagoda venerable's expression became even uglier. "You're messing with me. Why do you say that? You didn't have any objections when we agreed on the wager. Now that you have lost, you actually want to change the wager. That's a bit unreasonable." The pagoda venerable's expression kept changing. Sometimes it was fierce, sometimes it was fearful, sometimes it was helpless. Suddenly, it turned into hatred. If it wasn't for the fact that his cultivation had been suppressed to the level 8 pseudo-sage and he hadn't recovered, he might have already pounced on Luo Fan to kill Luo Fan. After a long while, the pagoda venerable gritted his teeth. "Fellow Taoist has come to fight for the right to participate in the Tao discussion. It must be because of the treasure-seizing assembly. If I am willing to rely on fellow Taoist, I will hand over all of my gains from the treasure-seizing assembly to fellow Taoist. I'll also give you 2 level 9 pseudo-sage treasures. I wonder if you can let me go?" Luo Fan was tempted when he heard that. In fact, he didn't have any deep enmity with the pagoda venerable. If he could gain control of the pagoda venerable's power and have it help him participate in the treasure-seizing assembly and obtain the treasures left behind by the master of the book venerable and the others, it seemed to be acceptable. However, after thinking for a while, Luo Fan shook his head and sighed. Although the two of them didn't have any deep enmity before. However, after experiencing the previous battle, this hatred had clearly been deeply planted in their hearts. Even if he let the pagoda venerable go now, and the pagoda venerable really used his own power to help him obtain more benefits from the treasure-seizing assembly, what would happen after that? After the pagoda venerable left, would he face Luo Fan calmly? Would he completely eliminate his enmity with Luo Fan? That was obviously impossible. Therefore, if Luo Fan let the pagoda venerable go after this, what awaited him in the future would be a long entanglement with a level 9 pseudo-sage. It would be a level 9 pseudo-sage eyeing him covetously all the time, who could bite him at any time when it was inconvenient for him. It could be said that if Luo Fan really did that, he would be taking a huge risk. If there were enough rewards, such as allowing him to attain the mixed yuan Dao fruit and become a sage, then this risk would naturally be worth it. However, it was obvious that if he let the Pagoda Venerable go, he would at most obtain some treasures that would increase his strength a little, but wouldn't be of much use to him becoming a sage. This obviously wasn't a good reward, and it wasn't worth the risk. After thinking this through, Luo Fan's choice was already very obvious. He said indifferently, "Forget it. Although fellow Daoist's suggestion is very tempting, I don't care. Although your proposal is very tempting, I don't want a level 9 pseudo-sage mortal enemy to spy on me and cause me trouble all the time. Therefore, I hope that you will abide by the bet." The Pagoda Venerable's expression finally changed when he heard this. "No!" With that, his body shook and suddenly collapsed. This collapse completely destroyed the space within the cave, causing the flow of time within the cave to become chaotic. It also caused the nomological laws in the cave to shatter inch by inch. This wasn't because the Pagoda Venerable had taken his own life after Luo Fan said this. Instead, the Pagoda Venerable was putting himself at death's door. He directly destroyed his own body and soul, turning everything into a terrifying destructive force to break the seal in defense of the cave and escape. Although he was only left with level 8 pseudo-sage cultivation due to the suppression of the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron, he was still a level 9 pseudo-sage. However, he was still a level 9 pseudo-sage after all, and the power he possessed was shockingly strong. The effect of such a sudden explosion was extremely extraordinary. After all, this cave was only a place for a level 9 pseudo-sage to hold a banquet. It wasn't a place for level 9 pseudo-sage existences to fight fiercely. The Pagoda Venerable borrowed all the power of a level 9 pseudo-sage and used it mysteriously, instantly breaking through the seal of the cave and sending his life source out in an extremely secretive way. As a level 9 pseudo-sage that had lived for countless years, even if the Pagoda Venerable didn't expect to die, he must have made many preparations to be reborn. As long as his life source escaped, it wouldn't take long for him to completely recover and even return to the level 9 pseudo-sage realm. The Book Supreme sighed at this moment. As expected, he's going to escape. With that, he patted the void. In an instant, his palm reached into the void and made a slight grabbing motion. In an instant, the Pagoda Venerable's life source fell into his hand. He directly retrieved it and returned to the cave. "No, I don't want to die. I still want to become a sage. I want to be eternal and indestructible. I won't die here." The Pagoda Venerable's life source roared. This voice was inaudible to mortals, but to all the cultivators present, including Zhan Huang, who was just a Khanate Grand Luo, they could hear it clearly. Hearing this scream, everyone present had a complicated expression on their faces. Even Luo Fan, who was the cause of all this, had a complicated expression on his face. A level 9 pseudo-sage that had lived for trillions of years actually behaved so clumsily in the face of death. The terror of death. One could imagine their strength and status were comparable to the Pagoda Venerable. In fact, they weren't much stronger. At this moment, the Pagoda Venerable's behavior suddenly made them feel sympathetic. Almost everyone couldn't help but think that the Pagoda Venerable was the same. How would they behave in the face of death? Could they behave better than the Pagoda Venerable? And when they thought of this, the answer they received made them feel a little ashamed. Because almost all the cultivators knew that they wouldn't behave better than the Pagoda Venerable. In fact, some cultivators even clearly realized that they would behave worse than the Pagoda Venerable in the face of death. The Book Supreme sighed and said, "Why bother? Since you know you can't keep your life, why not leave some dignity?" With that, he raised his hand and shook it. The Pagoda Venerable's life essence once again appeared in the void that had calmed down. It appeared alive in front of everyone. Of course, the Pagoda Venerable wouldn't listen to the Book Supreme. He roared and struggled frantically, trying to break free from this cave abode and escape. The Book Supreme didn't care about him. After saying that, he turned to Luo Fan and said, "Friend, my disciple has a great feud with the Pagoda Venerable. I wonder if you can let him deal the final blow to complete the bet? Luo Fan didn't have a strong desire to kill the Pagoda Venerable with his own hands. Therefore, he said indifferently, as long as the Pagoda Venerable completes the bet, it doesn't matter who takes his life. Hearing this, Zhan Huang bowed to the Book Supreme to express his gratitude. Then he bowed to Luo Fan and thanked Luo Fan. Then he turned to face the Pagoda Venerable with an indescribable expression. This expression seemed to be filled with hatred, pity, and some indescribable emotions. No matter what, the Pagoda Venerable was one of the existences that had created him. Such an existence was simply like his god of creation. Zhan Huang could not completely cast aside his feelings for the Pagoda Venerable. Sighing, Zhan Huang raised his hand and formed a hand seal. In an instant, all the power in the cave abode was mobilized by him. A golden blade appeared in the void and hung high above the Pagoda Venerable's life essence. Then, it slowly slashed down at the Pagoda Venerable. At this moment, the Pagoda Venerable was even more furious. A cultivator who isn't even as safe to be wants to hurt me? He roared and raised his hand to slap upwards. In an instant, the void trembled. The sharp blade that he had condensed the power of the entire cave abode was instantly smashed into pieces. The powerful impact swept in all directions, causing the space-time of the entire cave abode to vibrate violently. Although the Pagoda Venerable was only a life essence without any power, he was still a level 9 pseudo, sage-to-be, who was qualified to break through to the sage realm and obtain the holy decree. Even if he didn't have any power, he wasn't someone a Khanate Grand Luo cultivator could hurt. When he slapped his palm just now, there were millions upon millions of transformations. It turned out that the little bit of power that was triggered by the slap of his palm had been channeled by him. It was continuously transmitted and grew, finally turning into a shocking power that instantly dispersed the powerful god art that Zhan Huang had expended all of his energy to activate. Zhan Huang's face turned red. At this moment, he looked at the Pagoda Venerable with a solemn expression. There was no longer any hatred or pity. Pity was an emotion that could only be born when one looked down on someone. Previously, when Zhan Huang looked at the Pagoda Venerable, it was like looking at a fish on a chopping board. He felt that he could easily deal with the Pagoda Venerable. But now, he suddenly realized that the Pagoda Venerable wasn't a fish. Instead, he was a shark that could tear him apart. How could he still have such feelings? Luo Fan stood at the side with an extremely calm expression. Since he had already handed this matter over to the Book Supreme, he naturally wouldn't ask what the Book Supreme planned and did as long as the results met his requirements. Whether this Zhan Huang could take care of the Pagoda Venerable. How could he do it? To him, all of this was meaningless. Zhan Huang suddenly put his hands together. Endless power condensed, and a strong golden light exploded from his hands. It directly enveloped his entire body. Then, he roared. He pounced forward and punched the Pagoda Venerable's life essence. At this moment, all the level 9 pseudo, sage-to-be present could see it. The technique that Zhan Huang used was a technique that borrowed boundless energy to strengthen his body. Under the golden light, the strength of Zhan Huang's body had already far surpassed the level of a Khanate Grand Heavenly Realm cultivator. It even surpassed the level of an initial stage or minor stage sage. It was vaguely showing the demeanor of a medium stage sage. The Pagoda Venerable already knew that all his plans to escape would no longer work. All he could do now was to explode with the brilliance of battle at the last moment and protect his last bit of dignity in the final battle. After knowing this, the Pagoda Venerable put aside all the level 9 pseudo saints who were watching and focused all his attention on Zhan Huang. Although Zhan Huang's strength was a little weak, he was still the last choice in the battle. If the Pagoda Venerable didn't want to be crushed to death by the Book Supreme, he had no choice but to fight the Pagoda Venerable, although he no longer had any power. The Pagoda Venerable was still able to exert unimaginable strength with the help of his own realm. This battle actually crushed Zhan Huang in a domineering manner. It made Zhan Huang exhausted and unable to defeat the Pagoda Venerable. On the contrary, it was the pagoda venerable who was injured time and time again. The cave abode changed according to the pagoda venerable's will. When the two of them started fighting, a vast world was born naturally and became their battlefield. Therefore, the battle between the two of them did not affect the other cultivators. Instead, it provided them with a show for the banquet. If this goes on, I'm afraid Zhan Huang will be in danger. The remnant venerable smiled beside the Book Supreme. The Book Supreme said faintly, "Let's wait. He hasn't exerted all his strength yet." It seemed like he wanted to use the pagoda venerable to train the disciple he had just accepted. Luo Fan only took a few glances at the battle between the pagoda venerable and Zhan Huang before shifting his gaze to the many level 9 pseudo-saints around him. He wanted to see if there were any changes in them after the battle between him and the pagoda venerable. A faint smile appeared on his face as he took a closer look. He knew that he had achieved his goal. At this moment, none of the over 200 level 9 pseudo-saints present dared to show their malice towards him. At least on the surface, all the level 9 pseudo-saints treated him kindly, as if they really wanted to make friends with him. Indeed, it's all about strength. Luo Fan sighed inwardly and finally felt relieved. The reason why he had made such an intense bet with the pagoda venerable was because of the current situation. Before this, the many class 9 pseudo-saints had ill intentions towards him. They wanted to ambush him after he left this place and snatch the holy decree that he possessed. They didn't even bother to hide their intentions and directly revealed their ill intentions. They clearly didn't take him seriously at all. They didn't think that he was strong enough to withstand their attacks. Under such circumstances, if Luo Fan didn't make any moves to change the situation, then what awaited him would be endless schemes, sneak attacks, and attacks. In this way, even if Luo Fan was confident that those level 9 pseudo-saints wouldn't be too much of a threat to him. However, if those level 9 pseudo-saints joined forces, or if they didn't, and some of them just happened to gather together to attack him, he wouldn't have much confidence that he would be unscathed. It was because of this that Luo Fan realized that this was an opportunity when the pagoda venerable challenged him. An opportunity to show his strength and prove to everyone that he was qualified to possess the holy decree. That was why he made such a high-profile bet with the pagoda venerable. And judging from the change in the attitude of the people in front of him, his plan had obviously succeeded. The many level 9 pseudo-saints present had completely realized how powerful he was. They no longer dared to openly show their malice like they did in the beginning. Although he knew that there must be some among these level 9 pseudo-saints who were unwilling to give up and wanted to snatch his holy decree, there were only a few of them. For Luo Fan, he was confident enough to deal with them. He already had enough confidence to deal with them, no matter what those level 9 pseudo-saints thought. When Luo Fan looked at them, they all greeted him with a smile. He acted as if he and Luo Fan were old friends who had a very deep friendship. Luo Fan only smiled faintly at them and didn't show any arrogance. He also nodded and smiled. This was considered a greeting. While Luo Fan was secretly weighing the mentality of the people, the battle between Zhan Huang and the pagoda venerable had already reached the final stage. The pagoda venerable had already forced Zhan Huang into a corner and weakened him to the limit. Zhan Huang was almost unable to fight anymore. At this moment, the book venerable, who was watching from the outside, finally reacted. He smiled faintly and opened his mouth, sending a mysterious scripture directly into the world and into the mind of the pagoda venerable. He didn't hide the scripture, so all the level 9 pseudo-saints present could hear it. Even the pagoda venerable in that world could hear it clearly. In this cave abode, everyone who heard this scripture was someone with an extremely high level of cultivation. In an instant, everyone understood the meaning of the scripture. This scripture was to guide a Khanate Grand Luo cultivator on how to become a demi-saint and how to change the origin of life. It was clearly a technique that was completely targeted at Zhan Huang's current situation. With this scripture, Zhan Huang would not need much time to break through the Khanate Grand Luo and become a demi-saint. Moreover, his origin of life would also be reconstructed, and the power of his divine abilities would undergo a tremendous change. When that time came, it would be extremely easy for him to defeat the current Pagoda Venerable. While the grade 9 pseudo-martial saints outside were secretly interested, the Pagoda Venerate's expression changed drastically. However, he had already expected this to happen. He gritted his teeth and sped up his attacks without saying a word. Zhan Huang's body froze when he heard the scripture. Then, his body suddenly emitted an intense clear light. The clear light was so pure and condensed that it seemed like the purest and most condensed light in the world. After it appeared, it naturally formed a strange space that directly enveloped the space-time within a radius of 10,000 miles. Zhan Huang's cultivation level broke through a level within the clear light, and his strength skyrocketed. In the blink of an eye, his strength had increased by hundreds and thousands of times. For the Pagoda Venerable in the past, such an increase was like a tiny ant growing into a huge one. However, for Zhan Huang, it was like a mortal growing into a giant. In an instant, the Pagoda Venerable, who couldn't react in time, was blasted away by the aura. Before Zhan Huang could stabilize his cultivation level, he flashed over to the Pagoda Venerable and said, "Let's end this." As he spoke, he raised his hand and slammed his fist at the Pagoda Venerable. The power of the punch was shocking. It created countless spatial fragments that condensed into a round hammer that shook violently as it smashed down at the Pagoda Venerable. The Pagoda Venerable screamed and used the surrounding energy to condense layers of defense in an attempt to block the punch. Unfortunately, the power of the punch had exceeded the limits of the surroundings. The countless layers of defense instantly crumbled, and the punch smashed directly into the Pagoda Venerable's body. In an instant, the Pagoda Venerable shattered into tens of thousands of pieces. Moreover, these pieces continued to shatter and shrink in the void. In the end, they turned into nothingness and disappeared from the universe. However, under the bombardment of this punch, his body and Tao were directly destroyed, and his soul was scattered after the punch. Zhan Huang floated in the void in a daze. He seemed to be smiling, yet not smiling, and he seemed to be crying, yet not crying. Chapter 1395. Seeing the Tower Venerable die, Luo Fan sighed, but didn't say anything. After such a life-or-death battle, it was naturally impossible for the banquet to continue. However, the banquet had been going on for a long time. Ending it now didn't mean that it was going to end halfway. Therefore, the level 9 pseudo-divine sages talked for a while and agreed on how to contact each other. Then, they left the cave abode and dispersed. After everyone dispersed, Luo Fan said to the Book Venerable and the others, "I'm really sorry that this has delayed the banquet." The Book Venerable chuckled and said, "Why do you say that? This gamble is also a rule of the banquet. How can it be delayed? I still have to thank you. If it wasn't for you, how could I have gotten such a good disciple?" Hearing this, Luo Fan could only smile. After thinking about it, he asked, "I've often heard of Tao discussion, but where is it held? I almost forgot that this is your first time participating in the Tao discussion." The Book Venerable was a little ashamed. With that said, he raised his hand and pointed. A ray of light rushed out from his hand and instantly appeared in front of Luo Fan. With a glance, Luo Fan knew that this was the spiritual light of the place where the Tao discussion was held. Without any hesitation, he reached out and caught the spiritual light. The information contained within it instantly appeared in his mind. This was the location of a great thousand world. This great thousand world seemed to be many times more powerful than a normal great thousand world. According to the description of the information, this world was not much weaker than the demon realm. However, it was a pity that the time wasn't up yet, and other level 9 pseudo-divine sages were not welcome to enter. In other words, Luo Fan's original plan to head to the place where the Tao discussion was held and wait for the start of the Tao discussion was no longer feasible. Realizing this, Luo Fan sighed helplessly and said, "I see. Looks like I'll have to disturb everyone on this island for the next few years." "Haha, fellow Taoist, what are you saying? This island is so vast. How can we occupy it all? Tao friend, you can just casually open up a cave on this island." How could you say that I'm disturbing you? Luo Fan chuckled and said a few more words. Then he took his leave. There wasn't anything that was too important to him now, and spending a few hundred years of time to wait for the Tao discussion to be held wasn't a big deal to him. In fact, apart from Luo Fan, there were many other level 9 pseudo-saints who had settled down on the island and were waiting for the Tao discussion to take place. Apart from some of these level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators, most of them wanted to find pseudo-holy stage cultivators who could join them during the treasure-seizing meet. There were many false saints on this island. After all, only a small number of cultivators were able to pass the test set by the Book Venerate and obtain the qualifications to participate in the Tao discussion spell assembly. Of course, most of the cultivators would fail. As for the cultivators who failed to be selected, if they didn't want to lose the chance to participate in the Tao exchange, they could only rely on these 9th-level pseudo-sages and help them participate in the treasure-seizing assembly in the future. Therefore, for the many-level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators, it wasn't difficult to find pseudo-holy stage cultivators to rely on them. However, since these pseudo-holy stage cultivators could come to this island to participate in the test, they naturally knew the pros and cons of relying on other level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators to participate in the Tao discussion spell assembly. Knowing this, even if they had to rely on some level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators to participate in the Tao discussion spell assembly, they would still be very cautious. They would carefully choose the target they would rely on. Just like this, level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators would choose other level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators. This caused the island to become much more lively than it had been in the past few years. Some level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators had good reputations and were highly sought after by other pseudo-holy stage cultivators. Dozens or even hundreds of pseudo-holy stage cultivators wanted to rely on them so that they could participate in the Tao discussion spell assembly. However, some level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators had bad reputations, causing many pseudo-holy stage cultivators to be afraid of being chosen. Just like this. Sometimes, the level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators would set up some tests on the island, causing many pseudo-holy stage cultivators to flock to them. Sometimes, the tests set up by some level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators would be neglected, causing the entire island to fall silent. Many pseudo-holy stage cultivators didn't even dare to move around casually, afraid that they would accidentally fall into those tests and be forced to participate in the Tao discussion spell assembly by the level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators. This completely different treatment was nothing to ordinary pseudo-holy stage cultivators. However, among the level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators, they treated it as a joke. Luo Fan originally thought that it would be very boring for him to stay on this island, and that he could only cultivate and comprehend Tao by himself. However, he didn't expect the days he spent on this island to be extremely lively. The strength that Luo Fan displayed at the banquet had made all the level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators take him seriously. No matter what they thought, they didn't dare to treat him lightly. Among them, there were even many level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators who wanted to get to know him. Therefore, in the hundreds of years that Luo Fan opened his cave abode on this island, a level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivator would visit Luo Fan almost every few days to chat with him and exchange feelings. This kind of exchange allowed Luo Fan to unknowingly integrate into the circle of level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators. Since those level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators often visited, Luo Fan naturally couldn't not pay them a visit. Therefore, he had to visit other level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators from time to time to talk about heaven, earth, and the universe. As such, Luo Fan gradually learned about the legends of level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators. He also understood the personalities and tendencies of many level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators. At the same time, Luo Fan's name, Luo Zun, had unknowingly spread far and wide, and was gradually recognized by more and more cultivators. Even a 9th-level venerable had recognized this name. So how could other cultivators not recognize it? As the name of Luo Zun became more and more famous, an inexplicable change gradually appeared. On this day, on the 183rd year of Luo Fan's residence on this island, Luo Fan was observing the state of chaos in his cave abode, comprehending the various mysteries within it, either to supplement his worldview or to advance his cultivation realm. All of a sudden, Luo Fan frowned and discovered that in level 8 pseudo-holy stage cultivator had appeared outside his cave abode. This level 8 pseudo-holy stage cultivator was something that Luo Fan had heard of from other level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators before. He was a level 8 pseudo-holy stage cultivator that was recognized as a genius. His name was Kai Fuzi, and he had only cultivated for 300 billion years. Among the many level 8 pseudo-holy stage cultivators, he was definitely a young and promising genius cultivator. Back then, when he told Luo Fan about this level 9 pseudo-holy stage Kai Fuzi, he spoke with an extremely regretful expression. His tone was filled with regret for Kai Fuzi's arrogance and rejection of his recruitment. After hearing what the level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivator had said, that Luo Fan had been paying attention to this person out of curiosity. He was secretly surprised when he noticed this person. Kai Fuzi was extremely powerful. His comprehension was even higher, and the path he cultivated was a space-time path. To him, time and space were like his own hands that he could easily manipulate. He could control them at will. What Luo Fan had comprehended with great difficulty in the past was something as simple as eating and drinking for him to construct an incomparably complete world with the help of time or space. Such a level 8 pseudo-holy stage cultivator would almost certainly become a level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivator in the future, or even reach the sage realm and obtain a holy will. Perhaps because of this, Kai Fuzi didn't care about the recruitment of other level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators. Even when facing level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators, he was neither servile nor overbearing. He didn't act like he was inferior just because his cultivation realm was lower than theirs. Why would such a level 8 pseudo-holy stage cultivator appear outside his cave abode at this time? Luo Fan could not help but be curious. After Kai Fuzi arrived outside Luo Fan's cave abode, he bowed towards it and said, "I'm Kai Fuzi. I hope Senior Luo Zun can recommend me to participate in the Dao Discussion Conference. I'm willing to do everything I can to help Senior Luo Zun gain more in the Treasure Season Conference." Hearing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but be stunned. This Kai Fuzi didn't care about the recruitment of other level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivators, but he took the initiative to come to him, a cultivator who wasn't even a level 9 pseudo-holy stage cultivator? What kind of hobby was this? Out of curiosity, Luo Fan raised his hand and waved. Instantly, the door of his cave abode suddenly opened, revealing itself in front of Kai Fuzi. Then he said, "Come in and talk." Kai Fuzi bowed again and said, "Thank you, Senior Luo Zun, for giving me the chance to speak." Saying this, he stepped into Luo Fan's cave abode and appeared in front of Luo Fan in the blink of an eye. This cave abode was opened up by Luo Fan. The entire cave abode was a boundless starry sky. Luo Fan's current position was only on a flat surface with a radius of 100,000 feet in the starry sky. When Kai Fuzi stepped into the cave abode, he appeared directly on this flat surface. When Kai Fuzi saw his surroundings clearly, he couldn't help but reveal an expression of surprise and admiration. He bowed towards Luo Fan and said, "Kai Fuzi greets Senior Luo Zun." Luo Fan raised his hand and said, "No need to be so polite." However, he didn't use the cave abode's power or his own power to forcefully lift Kai Fuzi up. Kai Fuzi was, after all, a Class 8 false saint, and his own cultivation realm was much higher than his. This kind of action that could only be done with a huge difference in cultivation realm was a little inappropriate for him to do. Not to mention how Kai Fuzi would feel just the strength he used was a little hard to control. If he used too little strength and couldn't lift Kai Fuzi up, that would be a very embarrassing thing. And if he used too much strength and lifted Kai Fuzi off the ground, that wouldn't look good either. Therefore, Luo Fan's best course of action was obviously only one, and that was to directly make a gesture and let the bobber stand up on its own. This not only showed his respect for the bobber, but also prevented him from losing face due to improper strength. Kai Fuzi straightened his body. Luo Fan looked at Kai Fuzi. He found out that he was an extremely handsome young man with an indescribable aura. As he stood there, he exuded the aura of an absolute winner in life. That legendary jade tree seemed to be an adjective specially created for him. Do you know that my cultivation realm is only a class 5 false saint? Luo Fan sized up Kai Fuzi and asked. This is a legend in the world. Of course I know about it. Then do you know that the other class 9 false saints are very interested in you and want to recommend you to participate in the Tao discussion? Luo Fan asked again. Many seniors love me so much. I'm not someone who doesn't know what's good for me, so of course I know about it. Kai Fuzi said. Luo Fan frowned and said, since you know that my cultivation realm is far inferior to yours, and there are many grade 9 pseudo-sages interested in you, why did you ask me to recommend you to participate in the Tao discussion? He was now recognized by the Book Supreme and the others as having the equivalent of a class 9 false saint. The right to participate in the Tao discussion. Of course, he had the ability to recommend other false saints to participate in the Tao discussion. However, having this ability did not mean that he would recommend other false saints. After all, he was only a level 5 pseudo-sage. If he recommended someone below level 5 pseudo-sage to participate in the Tao discussion, it would be like a child recommending an adult to attend a banquet. However, if he recommended a cultivator above level 5 pseudo-sage to participate in the Tao discussion, it would be like a child recommending an adult to attend a banquet. It would also seem a little awkward. So it turned out, Luo Fan had never thought of recommending someone to participate in the Tao discussion. First, a class 8 false saint suddenly came to him. How could he not be curious and feel that it was unbelievable? Kai Fuzi said firmly, Senior Luo Zun's ability is known to the world. He is an ultimate venerable, but it cannot be judged by cultivation realm. I wholeheartedly pursue the strong, so of course I will choose Senior Luo Zun. Ultimate venerable was what the cultivators in the demon realm who knew about the existence of the holy decree called the class 9 false saints who failed to break through to the sage realm and obtain the holy decree. Since Kai Fuzi called Luo Fan an omnipotent venerable, he obviously knew that Luo Fan had grasped the type of holy decree. He knew that Luo Fan's ability was already above a normal class 9 false saint. So that's what you think. Luo Fan came to a realization. Kai Fuzi nodded. That's right. My ability is actually quite far away from a real ultimate venerable, Luo Fan said. Senior Luo Zun is too humble. If you don't have the ability of an ultimate venerable, how can other class 9 false saints acknowledge you? Kai Fuzi said. Luo Fan shook his head and smiled. He did not continue this topic and said, for people who understand, my ability is indeed not below a class 9 false saint. But for ordinary people, I'm only a class 5 false saint. I'm only a level 5 pseudo-sage, but you, a level 8 pseudo-sage, want to rely on me? Don't you feel ashamed? Kai Fuzi said indifferently. Although I can't find the path to become a class 9 false saint, I still have some Tao heart. How can these words of others leave any mark in my heart? Luo Fan laughed and said, indeed, to be able to become a false saint, one's Tao heart should be firm and unshakable. Since you've already decided for me to recommend you, then you must have made up your mind. No matter what I say, you won't be shaken. Kai Fuzi bowed, indicating that Luo Fan's words were correct. Luo Fan did not wait for him to reply and said, since that's the case, I'll tell you the truth. Actually, I've never thought of recommending anyone to participate in the Tao discussion. Participating in the treasure-seizing assembly is just an experience for me. I don't expect to gain anything from it. Hearing this, Kai Fuzi's eyes flashed with a hint of as expected. Luo Fan's actions over the years were no secret to those with discerning eyes. Anyone with a bit of analysis would be able to tell what his mentality was like. Since Kai Fuzi dared to ask Luo Fan to recommend him, he had obviously researched Luo Fan. How could he not know his mentality? I'm aware of that. However, recommending someone won't cause Senior any loss. Moreover, although Senior doesn't expect much from the treasure-seizing assembly, it's always a good thing to get more treasures. I think Senior shouldn't refuse the help of a powerful cultivator. Kai Fuzi said. Luo Fan heard this and laughed heartily. You're right. Hearing this, a look of relief appeared on Kai Fuzi's face. He felt that this matter had already been settled. However, Luo Fan quickly changed the topic and said, however, I still have a doubt. If you can answer it, I'll give you a chance to test me. If you can't answer it, Luo Fan didn't finish his sentence. However, the meaning behind his words could not be more obvious. Evidently, he was going back to where he came from. Kai Fuzi's expression stiffened, but he quickly gathered himself and said, Senior, please ask. I'll tell you everything I know. I'll tell you everything I know. Luo Fan said plainly, you're publicly acknowledged as a genius. All the level 9 pseudo-saints who told me about you declared that you'll definitely reach level 9 in the future and step onto the 9th step. You even have a great chance of becoming a supreme venerable in the future. With this kind of talent, strength, and potential, you're definitely able to pass the test set by the Book Supreme and obtain the right to participate in the Tao Discussion Assembly. If that's the case, why didn't you take the right path and instead chose the rugged path of relying on other level 9 pseudo-saints? Hearing this, Kai Fuzi fell silent. After a long while, he then said, this matter involves a secret of mine. I hope Senior can keep a secret for me. Speak your mind. To you, these are your secrets, words of utmost importance. But to me, they are merely words. Why would I say anything more? If you don't believe me, then turn around and leave. If you believe me, then tell me. Luo Fan said. Kai Fuzi sighed and said, I naturally believe Senior. Since Senior wants to know, then I'll tell you. Next, Kai Fuzi said a long paragraph. Luo Fan suddenly didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he heard this, because the content of the story made him feel that it was a bit melodramatic. The reason why Kai Fuzi wasn't willing to participate in the Book Supreme's test and obtain the right to participate in the Tao Discussion Assembly was because of Wu Zun, or to be more specific, she was one of Wu Zun's former confidants and his current Tao companion. Hundreds of billions of years ago, Kai Fuzi was a disciple of a sect in the demon realm. At that time, Wu Zun's Tao companion was an elder of this sect. Because of certain events, the two of them crossed paths and came into contact, and so on and so forth. Gradually, Kai Fuzi's heart was moved by Wu Zun's Tao companion. After that, Kai Fuzi worked hard to cultivate. He wanted to grow to the point where he was worthy of Wu Zun's Tao companion and come back to explain things to that woman and become Tao companions. But unexpectedly, that woman met Wu Zun when she went out to travel. From then on, she didn't return to the sect and went far away with Wu Zun. When Kai Fuzi finally became a false sage, he wanted to find that woman and explain things to her, but found that she was nowhere to be found. After searching for a while, he found out that she had already become someone else's Tao companion. This was a shocking truth. At that time, he felt as if he could destroy the heavens and the earth but still not be able to vent his frustration. His hatred towards Wu Zun could be imagined. Although such a thing had happened hundreds of millions of years ago, it was still not enough. But to Kai Fuzi, it was something that he couldn't forget no matter how much time passed. Therefore, even if that woman might have forgotten about Kai Fuzi, he still didn't want to get the right to participate in the Tao discussion from someone who had a close relationship with Wu Zun. It was precisely because of this that he came looking for Luo Fan at this moment to ask for his recommendation. Hearing Kai Fuzi's story, Luo Fan could only shake his head helplessly. Who would have thought that after going around in circles, it was all because of Wu Zun, because of a woman? Other things were fine, but Luo Fan couldn't say much about the hatred of stealing his wife. Therefore, Luo Fan could only nod and say, "You're not telling the truth. But I agree with your explanation. I'll give you a chance to test me. As long as you pass my test, I'll recommend you to participate in the Tao discussion." Kai Floater instinctively wanted to explain that he wasn't lying. But when he heard Luo Fan's last sentence, he swallowed his original explanation and said, "Thank you, Senior Luo Zun." Luo Fan only smiled and clapped his hand in the air. In an instant, strange worlds started to appear in the air. Chapter 1396. These worlds were all different in nature and structure. The rules and laws within them were all different and focused on different things. The speed at which these worlds appeared was unimaginable. In an instant, hundreds of millions of worlds appeared directly in front of Luo Fan and Kai Fuzi. The changes involved were extremely complicated. Even though Kai Fuzi was a powerful level 8 pseudo-sage, he could only see Luo Fan's initial actions clearly. He could only see the mysteries of the first few worlds. As for the latter worlds, they changed too quickly and were too complicated. He could not understand them at all. Seeing Luo Fan's actions and the results of these actions, Kai Fuzi could not help but be shocked. This method was even more mysterious, profound, and mysterious than the other level 9 pseudo-sages he had seen before. Although this person before him was a level 5 pseudo-sage, his strength was actually stronger than an ordinary level 9 pseudo-sage. After discovering this, the faint arrogance that he originally had completely disappeared. Luo Fan very quickly opened up the many worlds he needed. All the worlds formed a halo in front of him. Within the halo, light and shadow flowed, showing the changes of countless worlds. Enter this cluster of worlds. If you can get out within 100 years, you will pass my test, Luo Fan said faintly. Kai Fuzi was furious. 100 years? Even if it was a test set by the Book Supreme, he was confident that he could get through it within a day. This person in front of him actually dared to say that he would waste 100 years of his time with this small test. This was simply looking down on his ability. How could he not be furious? At this moment, Kai Fuzi made up his mind. He had to get through these clusters of worlds in the shortest time possible. Get out of this world. It would be best if he could get out within today. Seeing Kai Fuzi's expression, Luo Fan knew what he was thinking. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, the flow of time in this world is much faster than the outside world. 100 years is roughly equivalent to 100,000 years inside. That's enough time for you to explore." Hearing this, the anger between Kai Fuzi's brows lessened. After all, he had seen what Luo Fan had done previously. That kind of divine ability that he couldn't comprehend at all was truly powerful. After seeing it, he could only feel shock. For a person with such strength to repeat the question of time so seriously, he must be serious. In that case, was this test really that difficult? Did they need to waste so much time to get through? With such worries and thoughts, he certainly couldn't just be as infuriated as before. Instead, he began to carefully recall the characteristics of the worlds that Luo Fan had opened up. Unfortunately, he had only seen the first few worlds, and the information he obtained was so little. How could there be any gains? After thinking it through, Kai Fuzi bowed and said, "I understand. Senior Luo Zun, please open the door and let me take the test." Luo Fan did not hesitate. He smiled and said, "Since you're ready, let's begin." Then he raised his hand and pointed at the halo in front of him. Instantly, the halo spun and a door appeared in front of Kai Fuzi. Kai Fuzi stepped into the door without hesitation. As he stepped into the door, it shook slightly and disappeared without a trace. Then, the light that appeared in the center of the halo stabilized. It no longer showed the appearance of countless worlds rotating. Instead, it was fixed on one world, shining on one of the countless worlds. That world was not the others. It was the world that appeared after Kai Fuzi stepped into it. This world had extremely strange rules. It was a world created for battle and destruction. This entire world, all existences, all of them had the same body, the same power, and the same speed. Using the exact same physical state, they continued to fight and resurrect in that world again and again, from the endless past all the way to the endless future. At this moment, Kaifuzi had entered this world. Moreover, his body, his power, his speed, and even his cultivation were all suppressed to the point that they were no different from any living being in this world. Kaifuzi was an extremely powerful level 8 pseudo-saint, although this body was still extremely unfamiliar to him. With his mind, he was still able to unleash unimaginable power. Before he could completely adapt to this body, he had already started a massacre. He cut off the heads of dozens of living beings that attacked him to gain some time to familiarize himself with the state of his body. How is it possible that everything has been stripped to such a level? Every drop of my power was cultivated by myself. Every drop has completely fused with my foundation. Even a supreme, venerable can't strip my power. How can this Luo Zun strip my power to such a level? Kaifuzi's mind was in shock. He could not calm down at all. He was not Luo Fan. Although he had countless fortuitous encounters, visited many powerful cultivators, and listened to many level 9 pseudo-saint preachings, he had never encountered a test that completely stripped his power and cultivation realm. This test that made his body extremely weak instantly made his mind lose balance. He could no longer maintain his original attitude that was neither servile nor overbearing. Suddenly, Kaifuzi's body exerted the wrong force. With a muffled bang, his entire body exploded from his own power. It turned into a bloody mist that was blown away by the wind. This was the first time he had died in this world. The instant Kaifuzi died, Kaifuzi's body appeared from nothingness in the 3,600 resurrection points in this world. However, this time, his eyes were a little blank. He seemed to have forgotten something. The memory of how he died was completely forgotten. What happened just now? Right, I'm participating in Luo Zun's test. What is this world? How did my body become so weak? Just as he was thinking about this, a wave flashed past. His body disappeared from the resurrection point and was randomly thrown into a battlefield in this world. There were billions of living beings in this world. They were constantly killing each other in countless battlefields in this world. However, there were only 3,600 resurrection points. One could imagine how busy the resurrection points were. The instant Kaifuzi was delayed at the resurrection point, hundreds of thousands of similar living beings appeared beside him in a daze. If there wasn't such a mechanism to quickly transfer living beings, the resurrection point would have been completely filled up within a few seconds. The living beings that came later would probably not even have the space to resurrect. Kaifuzi suddenly landed on the battlefield. Instantly, dozens of living beings attacked him. These living beings' attacking methods were amazing. They could utilize their own power by almost 100%. If they were in the mortal world, each of these living beings would definitely be considered a martial arts master. One person would definitely have no problem dealing with an army. However, Kaifuzi was about to break through to level 8 pseudo-saint. His utilization of his body was not just 100%. It was almost 1,000%, 10,000%, or even 100,000%. Even without using his body's power, he could unleash super destructive power. Moreover, his own power was no different from other living beings. Faced with the shocking attacks of the dozens of living beings, Kaifuzi merely frowned. He raised his hand and punched out. In an instant, the endless mysteries of martial arts were contained within it. As he raised his hand and punched, he easily crushed the dozens of living beings that had the same power as him. He did not just kill them. Instead, he completely crushed them like an adult crushing ants. One could imagine how strong his control over power was. However, this method did not come without a price. This was because he was already used to controlling vast and powerful power. The bobber couldn't grasp the little power that it currently possessed. In that instant, he had already plundered too much of the power that his body had. He had actually squeezed out all the potential of his body. Instead, his body went limp, and he almost lost all his fighting ability. This won't do. His body is simply too weak. I have to create a corresponding cultivation method to use the power. Otherwise, this body will collapse after a few times like this. With this thought, Kai Fuzi's heart moved slightly. Countless words and images flashed through his mind. After all, he was a level 8 pseudo-saint. He was the peak existence that was closest to level 9 pseudo-saint in the entire demon world. This kind of existence had long formed their own Tao. Under normal circumstances, it would be a simple and easy task to create a cultivation method that could allow ordinary people to cultivate directly to the pseudo-sage level. Creating a cultivation method that was suitable for his current body was obviously a piece of cake for him. In the blink of an eye, Kai Fuzi had created an extremely mysterious martial art cultivation method. This martial art cultivation method was extremely profound. If any ordinary person obtained this cultivation method and understood its profoundness, it would be extremely easy for them to unleash the power of 5,000 kilograms with 4 tails of strength. However, compared to Kai Fuzi, the offensive power of this cultivation method was secondary. To Kai Fuzi, the most significant thing was the upper limit of the power that this cultivation method could unleash. It was precisely because there was a limit to this cultivation method that when Kai Fuzi used this cultivation method, he would not be able to use all the potential and foundation of his body like when he used his own will. As a result, his body would be like a lamp that ran out of oil, and in the end, he would be like a fish on a chopping board. After Kai Floater created the martial arts technique he needed, the other creatures around him had already pounced on him while yelling and shouting. Kai Fuzi did not know if it was an illusion, but he felt that these living beings were slightly stronger than the ones before. Furthermore, their movements seemed to have a hint of Kai Fuzi making his own moves. However, this was clearly not the time to think too much. Kai Fuzi's heart moved, and he directly used the cultivation method that he had just created. As his powers surged, his movements were swift, and with a few strikes, the living beings that pounced on him were killed. This effect was much weaker than when he casually crushed them, but Kai Fuzi was still very satisfied. Because, although the effect was weaker, he still finished off his opponent in one move and did not affect the outcome of the battle at all. Apart from that, his body did not feel as exhausted as before because he had plundered too much. Instead, it was because of his surging power. It replenished a little of the foundation that had been plundered previously. How could he not be satisfied with such a strong contrast? Kai Fuzi shouted and pounced into the midst of those living beings, killing them one by one. His killing efficiency was extremely high. In just a short 2 hours, he had killed all of the hundreds of thousands of living beings on the battlefield, and he was the only one left on the battlefield. This is it. This should be considered a pass, right? Kai Fuzi looked at the empty surroundings and could not help but mutter to himself. After continuously using his cultivation method during the 2 hours of battle, his body had completely recovered to its peak. In other words, he had recovered the basic standards of this world. Just as Kai Fuzi was frowning and waiting, there was a ripple, and living beings appeared out of thin air on this battlefield. The many corpses that had originally been on this battlefield. At this moment, they suddenly turned from corporeal to illusory and gradually disappeared. Soon, the entire battlefield was filled with hundreds of thousands of living beings. It looked exactly the same as when Kai Fuzi had first arrived. Kai Fuzi frowned and thought to himself, this still isn't considered a pass. No matter how many come, they will only be killed. They cannot pose any threat to me. What's the point of this test? Are you trying to test my patience? He thought in confusion. Luo Fan looked at the scene in the light from the cave abode and only smiled faintly. How could his test be so simple? If Kai Fuzi really thought that he could pass the test just by killing like this, he was probably going to be disappointed. Kai Fuzi seemed to look down on Luo Fan's test, but he still had to take it seriously. However, he had no choice but to take this seriously, so he took the initiative to charge into the crowd of people and slaughter them. This slaughter caused his expression to change drastically, because he had already discovered it. These were clearly living beings that had just been resurrected, but they were nearly twice as powerful as before. It wasn't that their bodies were twice as powerful, but but that their battle techniques were much more powerful than before, causing their strength to double. Kai Fuzi could even faintly feel traces of himself from the attacks of those living beings, and the aura of the cultivation method he had created. Kai Fuzi was instantly bewildered. Is he absorbing the profundity of my attacks? If that's the case, won't they become stronger the more I kill? What happened next confirmed Kai Fuzi's guess. When Kai Fuzi once again easily killed off these hundreds of thousands of living beings, the living beings that were resurrected obtained some of Kai Fuzi's battle techniques, and their overall strength was nearly twice as powerful as before. After two such advancements, they were no longer as defenseless against the float as before. Kai Fuzi's methods were subtle and profound, and contained all sorts of inconceivable principles. He could use his own strength to mobilize thousands or even tens of thousands of times more power to attack. However, this kind of attack wasn't unlimited. When his opponents were weak, this kind of attack was naturally successful. But when their opponents became stronger, this kind of attack was gradually blocked. This kind of blocking made it even more difficult for Kai Fuzi this time, and he even suffered many injuries before he could completely kill these hundreds of thousands of enemies. In the process, he had to create some new moves and cultivation methods to fight against the enemies. As a result, the strength of those resurrected beings increased once again. They even mastered the cultivation methods and techniques that they had to recreate in order to defeat their opponents. This finally broke through Kai Fuzi's limit. Finally, Kai Fuzi was besieged by the hundreds of thousands of living beings. After killing more than half of them, he was besieged to death by the remaining living beings. Even his corpse couldn't be preserved. It completely turned into nothingness. The moment Kai Fuzi died, another Kai Fuzi appeared at the resurrection point where he had been resurrected in the past. This resurrected Kai Fuzi seemed to have lost some of his memories. His eyes became blank. I seen I've died, but how did I die? Why can't I think of anything? He thought. His eyes suddenly became sharp. I'll lose my memories when I die. My opponents will die, but they will obtain my battle techniques. If this goes on, won't I eventually become the same as those creatures in this world? I'll become ignorant and unconscious, and I'll sink into oblivion forever. No matter what, he was a level 8 pseudo-saint with profound wisdom. Needless to say, his mind was strong. However, he wouldn't be so arrogant as to think that he wouldn't die even if his opponents kept getting stronger. What exactly is this world testing? Kai Fuzi frowned and thought. He had participated in some level 9 pseudo-saint tests and heard of some level 9 pseudo-saint tests. Among them, almost all of the tests could be passed with just a glance. However, there had never been a test like the one that Luo Fan gave him. He couldn't understand it at all. He didn't know how to break out of this world at all. Kill all the living beings in this world? I can resurrect infinitely here. I can't kill them all. Could it be that there's a passage to another world somewhere in this world? That's not possible. This world is so big. If I want to search every inch of it, I'll need tens of thousands of years. It's just one of so many worlds. It's impossible to waste so much time. Kai Fuzi thought. Just as he was thinking, a wave flashed, and he was thrown into another battlefield. This battlefield was different from the one he had killed in the previous few cycles. This battlefield was much bigger than the previous one, and there were more living beings in it. However, just like the other battlefields, the living beings in this battlefield were all living beings that had been upgraded. Each of them had the battle technique of Kai Fuzi. They could also unleash power that was dozens or even hundreds of times stronger than their own. After discovering this, although Kai Fuzi still had the strength, he didn't dare to kill them like he did before. He could only use mysterious footwork and didn't attack. He just kept avoiding those living beings. Those living beings didn't actually target Kai Fuzi. Each of them was an individual, and each of them represented their own faction. Everyone else was their enemy, their opponent. So, Kai Fuzi dodged like this, but no one chased after him. It was just that wherever he went, the surrounding living beings would attack him. In this way, he felt much more relaxed. However, he had enough time to think about what the test was and how he should pass it. Just what is this test trying to test? Kai Fuzi wondered. Unknowingly, he had already left the battlefield. Although this world was strange, it was still a complete world. There were all sorts of strange terrains in this world. There were rivers, lakes, seas, mountains, plains, grasslands, deserts, snowy mountains. These terrains also created all sorts of battlefields. The battlefield that Kai Fuzi first appeared in was a grassland. The battlefield that he appeared in for the first time was a desert. This time, the battlefield that he appeared in was a barren desert. I have to see this world completely to figure out how to pass this test, Kai Fuzi thought as he looked at the void. His current body didn't have the ability to fly. However, with his current strength, he was still far from being able to fly as a cultivator. However, who was Kai Fuzi? As an existence that could create and destroy worlds at will. Even if he became an ordinary person weaker than a baby, he could still find a way to fly if he wanted to. Moreover, he now had power that was several times stronger than an ordinary adult. With a single thought, he mobilized the powers around him with his will. The powers inside and outside of his body resonated with each other and pushed against each other. In the end, his body suddenly shot up into the sky. He shot up several thousand meters into the sky and began to look in all directions. Chapter 1397. In a certain location in this vast and boundless world, there was a towering mountain that seemed to connect the heavens and the earth. It stood like a pillar that supported the heavens. This mountain was extremely far away from where he was. Kai Buozi looked around and found that each of the 3,600 resurrection points was extremely far away from that mountain. Moreover, from each resurrection point to that mountain, one had to pass through at least 1,000 extremely large battlefields. Even on that mountain, there was a battlefield at every step, all the way to the clouds. It was so high that even Kai Buozi couldn't see it from a dare. Given such a unique scene, even an ordinary person could guess that to pass this test, one had to ascend to the peak of that mountain, let alone a pseudo-saint like Kai Buozi. After understanding how to pass the test, Kai Buozi was no longer at a loss. His figure slowly descended. Although he could fly, his body did not give him the ability to do so. Flying like this, for him, required a lot of energy. Moreover, his speed was not as fast as if he was traveling on the ground. In comparison, was there a need to say more about which choice he should make? The sky in this world seemed to have the effect of obscuring one's vision. After descending to the ground, he raised his head to look at where the mountain was, but all he could see was the vast sky. He could no longer see the towering mountain peak that pierced through the clouds and connected the sky with the earth. This is simply a trap. If I didn't fly into the sky, wouldn't I have to wait countless years to travel the entire world to find that mountain? Kai Buozi looked at the changes in the sky. He could not help but feel helpless. At this moment, another creature pounced at him. He casually swatted it, smashing it into powder and meat paste. Then, he quickly used his wondrous footwork. In a few moves, he had already left his original position. After a few more turns, he quickly rushed out of the battlefield. There were many living beings on this battlefield. Even Kai Buozi's movements were swift and elegant. His methods were brutal and decisive, but it was impossible for him not to be stopped by the other living beings. As a result, this journey was filled with blood. Even Kai Buozi, he could not help but gradually be stained with blood. His entire body gradually turned into a bloody man. If I go in this direction, there will be more obstacles. Is this Luo Zun's hint? Kai Fuzi thought to himself. His expression was a little strange. Through the obstructions encountered while rushing in this direction, Kai Buozi soon discovered that it was easier to encounter obstructions in the direction of the mountain peak. For a moment, his heart surged, but he understood Luo Fan's plan. In his heart, he felt that Luo Fan's test was a scam. There was a hint that one didn't need to fly into the sky to see the existence of the mountain. This was already considered a hope of passing the test. Although the difficulty of this test was a little high, there was no shortcut at all compared to the previous test. They could only use time to endure, but it was much better. The fighting technique of driving a bobber was beyond imagination. Very soon, he passed through the obstruction of the living beings on the battlefield and left. After leaving the battlefield, he was not at a loss. He chose the location of the mountain and quickly rushed over. Although he had unleashed his body's potential to the limit, the speed he could reach was unimaginably fast. However, that mountain was too far away from here. Even if he rushed over without any obstruction, with his speed, he would need at least 10 years to reach there. Moreover, there were many battlefields on the way, which increased the time it would take him to reach that mountain. Perhaps, if everything went smoothly, he would need around 20 years to reach there. If he climbed to the peak of the mountain through the battlefields, he might need a few more years to reach the peak. Roughly speaking, if he wanted to pass Luo Fan's first test, he would need 30 to 40 years. When he thought of this, Kai Fuzi knew that Luo Fan was not lying when he said he would give him 100 years to pass this test. In this world, no living beings needed to eat, drink, or defecate. This world would naturally replenish all the living beings' consumption. All they needed to do was fight, and fight. All the living beings in this world were born from that resurrection point. As soon as they were born, they were already at the peak of their prime. As soon as they appeared, they were thrown into the battlefields to fight against other living beings that had the same strength, speed, and skills as them. Because of this, almost no living being could live for more than a year. Not even 1 in a billion could live for more than 10 years. Therefore, when Kai Fuzi walked in this world, all he saw were living beings in their prime. Apart from that, there was nothing else. The age composition of these living beings made it so that no matter how real, mysterious, or similar this world was, Kai Fuzi knew clearly that this was not a naturally formed world. In fact, this was not a world that could exist in a normal state. Kai Fuzi's speed was relatively fast. In just 3 short years, he had passed through tens of thousands of battlefields, and the number of creatures he had encountered was in the hundreds of billions. As he moved forward, the closer he got to that mountain peak, the more clearly he felt that the fighting skills of those living beings were superb, and the more difficult it was for him to avoid them. On this day, 3 years after he had set his goal, Kai Fuzi finally discovered that those living beings who were originally in a chaotic battle were now consciously targeting him. Although everyone didn't stop fighting because Kai Fuzi entered the battlefield, as long as Kai Fuzi entered the battlefield of some living beings, those living beings who were originally fighting would naturally shift their target to Kai Fuzi. Opponents who originally wanted to tear him to shreds and swallow him had now become close teammates. Kai Fuzi, who was originally a complete stranger, had now become the target of their hatred and anger. After killing such opponents a few times, Kai Fuzi gradually understood that he had entered a new stage of the test. In other words, the distance he had advanced had crossed a certain boundary, and he had begun to step into the second stage of the test. Kai Fuzi was nervous when he understood this. He was excited, perturbed. It was because after going through the tests over the years, he had become more and more aware that the test set by Luo Fan was not simple. The second stage of the test was much more difficult than the first stage. It was unknown whether he would die a few times because of this test and become excited. Since the test had been upgraded, it meant that he was walking in the right direction, on the right path. Although he was already being targeted, Kai Fuzi's strength was still shocking. Although they encountered some difficulties, it wasn't too difficult for them to charge through the battlefield in the end. Just like that, another 3 years passed. Kai Fuzi entered another battlefield. This time, all the hundreds of thousands of living beings on the battlefield were looking at him. Their gazes gradually turned red, revealing a cruel blood-red color. This change made him realize that he had already stepped into the third stage of the test. As expected, at this moment, those living beings started to pounce at Kai Fuzi and started to attack him with all sorts of martial arts that he had used before. Because there were too many of them, there were only a dozen or so living beings that came into contact with Kai Fuzi at any given moment. That was why Kai Fuzi could easily destroy them each time. However, there were just too many of them. They were endless, surging forward endlessly. After killing one batch, another batch would appear. If it wasn't for Kai Fuzi's ability to continuously circulate his energy to recover his strength during the process of attacking, he might have been killed and annihilated by the numerous living beings in just a short period of time. As long as I destroy them, I'll be able to pass this battlefield, Kai Fuzi thought to himself. Although there were too many living beings around him to count, he was still filled with fighting spirit. As he fought, he used all sorts of wondrous techniques. The power he displayed as he moved was truly powerful enough for anyone interested in martial arts to worship him. Suddenly, Kai Fuzi felt that something was wrong. I've killed at least tens of millions of living beings. Why are there still enemies attacking me now? After this thought flashed through his mind, he suddenly froze. Then, an indescribable gloominess appeared on his face. This was because he realized that he had killed at least 10 opponents who were attacking him now. It couldn't be any more obvious. While he was killing those living beings were resurrecting one after another, joining the battle and pouncing towards him. Knowing this change, the bobber knew that his response was wrong. At that moment, he withstood the powerful attacks and walked forward step by step. Just like that, he spent a few days before he finally crossed this battlefield. However, even after crossing this battlefield, those living beings were no longer restrained by the battlefield like before. Instead, they chased after him without a care for the battlefield. Realizing this, Kai Fuzi had no choice but to cheat. His figure moved, and he directly flew into the sky. He rushed into the air and broke away from the pursuit of the many creatures. After rushing into the sky, he instantly saw a mountain peak in the distance. Compared to the mountain peak he saw last time, he felt that the mountain peak seemed to have doubled in size. Evidently, the distance between him and the mountain peak had shortened by almost half. Kai Fuzi felt both helpless and happy when he understood this. He felt helpless because so many years had passed, but he was only halfway there. However, he was happy because he was at least halfway there. After lamenting for a while, Kai Fuzi looked down. He realized that those living beings were looking up at him with bloodshot eyes. He could not help but tremble, and he finally gave up on the idea of descending to continue his journey. In comparison, although flying the void was very exhausting, it was not too fast. Their speed wasn't too fast, but they were able to avoid being hunted down by so many people. In comparison, it was already the best choice. Therefore, Kai Fuzi changed his mode of travel to flying and began to fly towards the mountain peak that towered into the clouds. Flying like this allowed Kai Fuzi to feel a rare sense of peace again. Every time he passed by a battlefield, he could see countless living beings looking at him as if they wanted to tear him apart and swallow him. However, he did not need to fight anymore. He flew like this for another 3 years. Because he did not need to encounter any battles, compared to before, the distance Kai Fuzi had traveled in these 3 years was several times more. It was several times more than before. After 3 years, he had already arrived at a position extremely close to that mountain peak. When he arrived here and looked up, he could see that there was a mountain peak in front of him that was like a canopy in the sky. It stood in front of him. He looked forward. It seemed that he could only see this mountain peak from all directions. He could no longer see the world behind the mountain peak. One could imagine how huge this mountain peak was. However, after arriving here, Kai Fuzi had no choice but to stop again. Because after arriving here, he saw that in front of him, there were countless living beings floating in the air, quietly waiting for him. Impressively, these living beings had actually unknowingly learned to fly. They had already obtained the same strength as Kai Fuzi. Kai Fuzi had already expected such a thing to happen, but he was not too surprised. He sighed. As expected, I have no choice but to fight. As he said this, he shouted softly and pounced forward, suddenly crashing into that group of people, and began to fight. Luo Fan saw all of Kai Fuzi's actions, but at this moment, he shook his head inwardly. His brain is still a little rigid. Originally, he only needed to break through the barrier of the sky to pass the test, but now he actually spent so much time rushing to the heavenly peak. In the test that he had set, more than 10 years had passed. But in Luo Fan's cave abode, less than 3 days had passed. In these 3 days, he looked at Kai Fuzi's various actions and choices, but he was a little disappointed. Although the test that he had set was to test the fighting strength of the same strength and the same state, it was more to test how he could find a possible direction in an impossible situation. And the result was very obvious. Under the situation of the same body and the same strength, Kai Fuzi's fighting strength was indeed extremely strong, and indeed showed the strength of a level 8 pseudo-saint living being. But on the other hand, in terms of finding a way to pass the test, Kai Fuzi's ability to fight was rather poor. Luo Fan thought a little helplessly. Looks like if the test of the treasure-seizing gathering was a little more obscure, he wouldn't be able to help me much. With this thought, he slowly closed his eyes and no longer had the mood to pay attention to Kai Fuzi. Kai Fuzi did not know that his performance had already thoroughly disappointed Luo Fan. At this time, he was still using all of his various body's potential and using all of his fighting techniques to the limit. He continuously killed living being after living being and continuously eliminated batch after batch of opponents that blocked his way, continuously advancing towards the towering mountain that reached into the clouds. This went on for another year. Only then did Kai Buozi finally break through the barrier of countless flying creatures and truly set foot on the land of that mountain. The moment he set foot on the mountain, Kai Fuzi felt refreshed, as if everything about him had been raised to a higher level, and the value of his life had been reflected. Occasionally participating in the test is indeed beneficial to cultivation, he thought to himself. With this thought, he raised his head to look at the mountain, and could not help but show a look of anticipation on his face. Just what is at the top of the mountain? Was it a door of light, a teleportation array, or another world? No matter how tall the mountain was, it could not compare to the terrifying distance that he had sensed from a certain resurrection point. Hence, to him, no matter how many battles there were on the mountain, no matter how powerful the resistance was, to him, the peak of the mountain was already in front of him. At this moment, the surrounding living beings seemed to sense his arrival. Instantly, the sounds of killing shook the heavens. Many living beings fiercely pounced towards him, and the color of blood in their eyes was so dense that it was like blood that could not be assimilated. Sensing these living beings pouncing towards him, Kai Fuzi finally stopped looking forward to it and began to once again throw himself into the slaughter. He began to continuously fight against the many living beings. Although the strength and speed of the living beings on the mountain were no different from those from other places, their fighting techniques had already reached a level where they could even compare to Kai Fuzi. As they waved their hands, Kai Fuzi felt an incomparably huge pressure. There were even a few times when Kai Fuzi's entire body was almost smashed into meat paste. Just like that, Kai Fuzi advanced towards the peak of the mountain with great difficulty. Because the fighting techniques of the living beings he was fighting were similar to his, he was forced to create more and more exquisite methods to deal with their attacks. He had no choice but to constantly think about how to kill his opponent more efficiently. This made him. He was able to utilize his body more and more effectively, allowing him to become more and more familiar with the combat techniques of this body. Originally, when he fought, he could only use strength that was a few thousand times that of his body. But later on, he could use various methods. He could unleash strength that was hundreds of thousands of times that of his body. This kind of strength, in other places, even if it bombarded a mountain, it was enough to completely shatter and collapse the entire mountain. But here, it could be easily blocked by the numerous living beings. Even if it bombarded the mountain, it could only cause some mountain rocks to fall. Apart from that, there was no other effect. There seemed to be a special resurrection point on this mountain. This resurrection point could completely resurrect the dead living beings on the mountain in an instant and directly throw them into the many battlefields on this mountain, joining in the pursuit of Kai Fuzi. Thus, the numerous living beings attacking Kai Fuzi became endless. Finally, at a certain moment, a year after he set foot on the mountain, Kai Fuzi was hit by a living being's attack in a moment of carelessness. In an instant, Kai Fuzi directly collapsed, turning into a pile of meat paste. Then, in the next moment, Kai Fuzi directly resurrected at the resurrection point on this mountain. Every time he resurrected, Kai Fuzi would lose a bit of his memory. This time, he lost all his memories after he set foot on this mountain. In a trance, he felt as if he had just set foot on this mountain. I must have lost a lot of memories. In an instant, Kai Fuzi understood. After all, he was not stupid. He clearly felt that he had created countless cultivation methods that could make use of this body to unleash unimaginable power. After thinking for a while, he knew that he must have set foot on this mountain for a very long time and encountered strong resistance on this mountain. Only then would he waste his energy to create so many cultivation methods. Just as he was thinking about this, there was a flash of fluctuation, and his figure was sent to a battlefield. This battlefield was at the foot of the mountain. It could be said that as soon as he set foot on this mountain, he would inevitably appear on this battlefield. The massacre began once again. Just like that, Kai Fuzi spent more than 30 years and died more than 20 times before he finally broke through the barriers of many battlefields. He crossed the height of this mountain that was close to the distance between heaven and earth and rushed to the top of the mountain to see the scene that he had always been looking forward to at the top of the mountain. The moment he saw this scene, an inexplicable bitter smile appeared on Kai Fuzi's face. This was because he realized that at the top of this mountain, several tens of feet above his head, there was a thin film that covered the entire sky above this world. That thin film revealed all sorts of strange lights and shadows. That was another world. So, I don't even need to come to the top of this mountain. As long as I'm in this world, I can break through this world by flying up and rush into another world. At this moment, Kai Fuzi's heart was filled with dispiritedness. He stood there blankly, looking up at the other world close at hand. In a trance, he already understood the true meaning behind Luo Fan's test. Chapter 1398. Just as Kai Fuzi comprehended something, Luo Fan, who was in the cave abode, suddenly felt something. He instantly sensed what was happening in the many worlds, and an indescribable expression appeared on his face. Although it's a little slow, it's still something. It seems like it's not completely useless. Luo Fan thought to himself. He focused his attention back into the world and watched as Kai Fuzi continued to participate in the test. In the first world, after Kai Fuzi made up his mind, he leaped up and crashed into the strange world barrier above. In that instant, he felt as if he had passed through a layer of water. Suddenly, his body felt light. Then, he felt boundless power descend upon his body. His cultivation realm that had been sealed for more than 10 years had returned. His power, his senses, everything had reached his peak state. This feeling of being filled with power made Kai Fuzi feel inexplicably relaxed and joyful. Only after losing something would one know how to cherish it. For so many years, he couldn't control his power at all. His cultivation realm was restricted to an almost non-existent level. To him, it was an extremely painful experience, and he didn't want to experience it again in his life. He entered a brand new world. It was a boundless starry sky. The entire world was pitch black, dotted with stars. Boundless starry essence filled his surroundings, and there were layers upon layers of ripples that swept past where he was, wanting to grasp all changes in the entire universe. If he hadn't been extremely vigilant and made a move the moment his power and cultivation realm returned, he might not have been able to do so. Perhaps these fluctuations were already enough to completely grasp everything about him, causing him to no longer have any secrets on him. How is this possible? It's just a world created by Senior Luo Zun. How can such a powerful force be born? Although Kai Fuzi wasn't completely grasped by the ripples, he was still astonished by the existence of these ripples. These ripples were simply too powerful. They were so powerful that they were comparable to the power of a level 9 pseudo-saint. As a test world created by a level 9 venerable, it was simply impossible for such a level of power to exist in this world. And now, such a thing had happened directly. One could only imagine how shocking this boomerang was. Kai Fuzi was shocked. What he didn't know was that this universe was created by Luo Fan by simulating that technological universe. The civilization within such a universe wasn't a cultivation civilization, but rather a technological civilization. Such a technological civilization was fundamentally different from the cultivation civilization. However, the power that it could control could be superimposed. It could condense countless weak powers and superimpose them to produce an effect. Although this power had reached the ninth-grade pseudo-saint realm, it did not mean that a ninth-grade pseudo-saint realm existence was required to gather such a powerful power. Therefore, there was no need for Kai Fu to be so shocked. Kai Fuzi naturally didn't know this. After discovering the level of these fluctuations, he was even more grateful for his previous caution. He merged his perception with the universe in an extremely obscure way. It slowly spread out and gradually spread to all the stars in the universe. It carefully sensed the situation of the many stars, looking for the living beings in the universe, looking for the strange existence that was emitting all kinds of fluctuations. After all, it was a level 8 pseudo-saint. The current Kai Fuzi was more than 1 billion times stronger than when Luo Fan encountered that technological universe. Back then, Luo Fan could clearly sense the specific situation of the entire universe with his own power, let alone the current Kai Fuzi. In just a few breaths' time, the situation of the entire universe was absorbed by Kai Fuzi's senses. In an instant, Kai Fuzi knew the truth of this universe. For a moment, the shock on his face lessened slightly. However, a look of admiration replaced the shock on his face. It appeared on his face. As a native cultivator of the Devil Realm, Kai Fuzi's understanding of the world was limited to the Devil Realm. To him, a truly high-end world was a world with a powerful cultivation civilization, a technological civilization, a divine path civilization, a crystal civilization, and all sorts of other civilizations. None of them could compare to a powerful cultivation civilization. At this moment, the level of the technological civilization that appeared in front of him far exceeded his understanding of technological civilizations. The various technological methods revealed had even completely replaced the things that he had originally imagined could only be done by the true cultivation civilization. For example, reincarnation, creation, and so on. Rebirth of the physical body, the use of rules and laws, and so on and so forth. All sorts of mysterious and powerful techniques were an eye-opener for him. He felt as if a boundless world was slowly opening up in front of him. With such a feeling, it was easy to imagine how much he admired Luo Fan, who had brought all of this. Riding the buoy, he took a light step forward, and his figure had already arrived in the territory of a technologically advanced country. When Luo Fan created this world, he incorporated the various systems of that technological civilization into it. Therefore, the countries in this universe were not much different from that universe. Moreover, because Luo Fan's current cultivation realm was many times stronger than before, the technological level of the universe he created was a few levels higher than that of the universe he created back then. Back then, the technological products of that universe could only affect Dao Venerables. However, the technological civilization of this universe could even affect level 9 false saints. Kai Fuzi was already a level 8 false saint and could travel anywhere in this universe. However, he was still lacking when it came to the areas that were truly heavily guarded. If he dared to barge into those areas without any precautions, what awaited him would be the absolute strongest attack of those countries. Obviously, Kai Zi recognized this point. Hovering outside the country, he looked at the technological creation in the middle of the country that posed a threat to him. Kai Fuzi had learned his lesson from the previous world. After coming to this world, he no longer acted recklessly. Instead, he planned to try his best to understand the state of this universe before finding a way to break through it. Kai Fuzi was a level 8 false saint. Normally speaking, no universe would be able to form a shackle on him, nor would it be able to seal and restrict him. As long as he was willing, even in the demon realm, in the Earth's universe, he could break through the world's restrictions at will and leave the demon realm or the Earth's universe. However, in this universe, his unrestricted nature could not be used at all. As long as he had the thought of forcefully breaking through the barrier of this world, there would naturally be a force descending to dispel this thought and eliminate the power he gathered for this thought. After this happened a few times, Kai Fuzi naturally understood that this was Luo Xun's intention. If he wanted to pass the test, he had to break through the restrictions of this world according to the normal procedure. If he wanted to flip the table, that was absolutely not allowed. Because of this, he had no choice but to come here. He planned to gain a deeper understanding of this universe from his country and then break through the shackles of this world according to the route that Luo Fan had set. To enter the next world's test, Kai Fuzi floated in this position for a full 3 months. After 3 months, his body trembled, and the aura around his body underwent a subtle change. In the blink of an eye, he no longer looked like a cultivator. Instead, he looked more like a powerful life that belonged to a technological civilization in this universe. This change was not just on the surface. Instead, from the inside to the outside, everything that belonged to Kai Fuzi had changed. After doing all this, Kai Fuzi swaggered into the territory of that country. In an instant, layers of ripples swept through his body. They even swept through the smallest part of his body countless times, categorizing and comparing all of his information and secrets. Analyzing. After a while, these ripples receded, and he was completely treated as an ordinary life in this country. The country that Kai Fuzi chose was a country where ordinary life could live freely in the void of the universe because of all kinds of technological products. In such a country, Kai Fuzi flew through the void of the universe without any protection. However, it did not seem out of place at all. After encountering a few waves of people and moving around a few times, Kai Fuzi no longer left any traces that he did not belong to this country. This test is quite interesting. After completely concealing his identity, Kai Fuzi could not help but feel that it was quite interesting. Kai Fuzi had never experienced such an experience before. Suddenly having such an experience was clearly an extremely novel experience for him. Using the various modes of transportation in this country, Kai Fuzi arrived at a powerful technological creation at the center of this country in just a few days, hundreds of millions of light years away from where he was before. The powerful technological creation of this country was a terrifying existence that could create and destroy worlds. Such an existence was protected by countless worlds. It could be said that the most powerful defense in the entire country was itself. It did not need any other power, materials, or weapons to protect its existence. That was why Kai Fuzi could arrive here so easily and see this technological creation. These countless worlds were a huge problem for all creatures in the technological civilization. However, for Kai Fuzi, who came from the cultivation civilization, its defense was not much stronger than a piece of tissue. This did not mean that the cultivation civilization was much stronger than the technological civilization. It was just that the cultivation civilization had more research on man-made worlds. In particular, Kai Fuzi cultivated the space-time Tao, which was a Tao that was closely related to the world. It was natural that he could treat these countless worlds as fragile as a piece of paper. With a thought, Kai Fuzi easily passed through the stages according to his understanding of the world. Not long after, he had already passed through the barriers of the world and directly arrived in front of the technological creation, seeing it with his own eyes. It was an existence that looked like a crystal ball. However, it was as big as a huge star. When it created a world, it directly split out the shadow of a crystal ball and condensed it in the void. In the end, it produced a shocking explosion, giving birth to many things that were either strong or weak, or had all sorts of magical uses. Some of them even came out of seemingly ordinary worlds. The moment Kai Fuzi looked at the crystal ball shook slightly. Instantly, a huge human face appeared in front of Kai Fuzi. "You are not a being from this universe." Kai Fuzi was shocked, but he quickly understood. How could an existence that was comparable to a level 9 pseudo-sage not have intelligence? He slowly gathered his power, ready to attack or break through the barrier to escape at any time. He said, "I am indeed from another world. What do you plan to do?" What is your goal? The huge face said. It did not attack directly, which made Kai Fu heave a sigh of relief, even though he was curious. Although he was already prepared to fight, he was still not confident. He was facing an existence that was comparable to a level 9 pseudo-sage, even if he was confident that he could escape. However, it would be best if there was peace. Thus, Kai Fuzi said, break through this universe and leave it. Do you have any ideas? Hearing Kai Fuzi's answer, the face seemed to be relieved. You want to leave this universe? That's too simple. There is a strange wormhole at the center of the universe. As long as you enter it, you will naturally be able to leave this universe. Wormhole. Kai Fuzi frowned. After all, he was a cultivator born and raised in the cultivation civilization. He had no idea what a wormhole was. The face did not have any intention of explaining to Kai Fuzi. After saying that, the crystal ball suddenly blasted out a shadow of a crystal ball, wrapped around the float, and shrunk. With a single explosion, a savage world was born within 100 years. Carrying Kai Fuzi, it rushed out, crossing an unknown number of light years, and directly went outside that country. Then the world shook slightly. It disappeared in the blink of an eye, as if it had never existed. How straightforward. Kai Fuzi felt helpless. The reason why he was blasted out so easily just now was naturally not because the technological creation was so powerful that it could crush him at will. Rather, it was because the crystal ball did not have any malicious intent, and its attack was extremely covert. In the blink of an eye, that world had already carried Kai Fuzi across an unknown number of light years. If the technological creation had any malicious intent, Kai Fuzi would naturally be able to sense it and react instantly. Perhaps he would still end up in a very sorry state, but at least the situation would not be as easy as before. Kai Fuzi sensed it slightly and sensed the center of the entire universe. He saw a huge, pitch-black vortex that looked like a star. Combined with the name wormhole, he understood. Is this a wormhole? Such a violent existence can really lead to another world? Although he did not understand, Kai Fuzi was not a simple-minded person. Since he did not understand, he would learn. Wouldn't it be better if he learned until he understood? As a powerful level 8 pseudo-sage, Kai Fuzi's learning ability did not need much to be said. Using his senses, he could even sense the center of the universe that was billions of light years away. Sensing the many living beings in other countries in the universe, as well as the many carriers of technological knowledge, was naturally an extremely easy thing to do. With such a strong learning ability and such a large number of learning materials, how could technological knowledge be an obstacle for him? Over the next year, Kai Fuzi floated in the void and frantically learned all kinds of technological knowledge recorded in the universe. At first, Kai Fuzi only wanted to understand whether the wormhole could allow him to transcend this world and go to another world to learn this knowledge. However, the more he learned, the more he felt that this technological civilization was vast and profound. He could also sense that the existence of this technological civilization could be of great benefit to his cultivation and cultivation. This made him unknowingly become addicted to it, and he became more and more immersed in the technological knowledge of this technological civilization. He even faintly forgot his original intention. Kai Fuzi's changes in this world were seen bit by Luo Fan. When he saw that Kai Fuzi was immersed in the technological knowledge and could not extricate himself, he could not help but shake his head. Still not strong enough, although the wormhole was profound with Kai Fuzi's ability. If it was just to understand the mysteries of this wormhole, to find out if he could leave this universe through impulse, and to find a way to leave this universe through the wormhole, he would not even need a month. He would definitely be able to find it within 3 to 5 days now. He was actually still immersed in it after a year. It was obvious that the knowledge of the technological civilization had confused his Dao heart, and he had even forgotten his priorities. Luo Fan sighed inwardly. Although he's a cultivation genius, he still lacks experience. It's extremely difficult for such a cultivator to become a level 9 false sage, let alone become a sage. However, he did not throw these worlds aside, nor did he do anything to remind Kai Fuzi. He did not throw these worlds aside, because he had already developed some interest in the process of clearing the levels with Kai Fuzi. It was like watching a movie, wanting to see the result. As for not reminding Kai Fuzi, that was even simpler. Kai Fuzi was not his disciple, so why would he waste his energy to teach him cultivation? Kai Fuzi did not know that Luo Fan was slightly disappointed in him. However, he eagerly absorbed the vast amount of scientific and technological knowledge. He even constantly tried to integrate the vast amount of scientific and technological knowledge into his path of cultivation. He wanted his cultivation path to be able to combine the advantages of the two civilizations, the cultivation civilization and the technological civilization, to become stronger and smoother. Although his hard work was seen by Luo Fan as not doing proper work, and as a sign that his Tao heart was unstable, it was not impossible for him to produce results. Through his hard work, he managed to create all sorts of special divine abilities and special techniques. He faintly combined the profundities of the cultivation civilization and the technological civilization. This produced an effect that was far greater than 1+1, and made his strength visibly increase compared to before. After tasting this sweetness, Kai Fuzi was encouraged. He became even more immersed in the vast amount of technological knowledge, gradually forgetting the passage of time, gradually forgetting his purpose in coming to this universe, of course, perhaps to him. This kind of gain was even more important than passing Luo Fan's test and being recommended by Luo Fan to participate in the Tao discussion. In this state, Kai Fuzi floated in the void for a full 10 years before he finally woke up unsatisfied. In these 10 years, he had learned almost all the technological knowledge in the entire universe. Moreover, by combining these scientific and technological knowledge with his own cultivation path, he created more than 3,000 kinds of wonderful magical abilities, which made his strength 10% stronger than when he first participated in Luo Fan's test. Kai Fuzi raised his hand, and a planetary fortress completely formed from time and space appeared in his palm. It slowly rotated above his palm, and the time and space within it constantly changed intensely. As they flickered, they gave off an aura that could destroy the universe. This was one of the more than 3,000 divine abilities. It was a divine ability created by Kai Fuzi by combining his own Tao with a star fortress that could destroy the entire universe. Once this ability was activated, it could unleash a devastating blow that could completely destroy this entire technological universe. It could even destroy Kai Fuzi himself along the way. Feeling the terror of the planetary fortress in his hand, Kai Fuzi was secretly delighted. With this kind of gain, even if I failed the test this time, it's worth it. Luo Fan watched Kai Fuzi's movements from outside, and when he heard what he said in that world, he could not help but sigh. Neglecting the essentials for trifles, although the ability Kai Fuzi used was powerful, it did not help his cultivation realm at all. What was the point of this for a cultivator who sought to become a saint and pursue eternity? Chapter 1399. Although Luo Fan was a little disappointed with Kai Floater, who had almost forgotten that his participation in the Tao discussion would bring him more benefits, Luo Fan was still curious about how he would pass the trials. Therefore, he only thought about it in his heart and did not really shift his attention away from Kai Floater. Instead, he continued to quietly watch how Kai Floater would pass the trials. After Kai Floater had spent 10 years using his knowledge of science and technology to create all sorts of divine abilities, he finally remembered the reason why he had participated in the trials. Through his knowledge of science and technology, he naturally knew what a wormhole was. He understood that one could really leave this universe through a wormhole and pass the trials of this world. Kai Fuzi didn't waste any more time. Soon, he traversed the void and arrived at the center of the universe. As the center of the universe, even if it was a place of nothingness that originally had nothing special, it would definitely be noticed by many countries in this universe due to its unique location. Not to mention that there was a wormhole that led to other worlds and other universes. One could imagine how much the countries in this universe would fight for the defense of this location. It could be said that at every moment, There were several wars erupting around this center of the universe. At every moment, there were countless living beings dying in this center of the universe. Even their souls could not escape. A place with such tight defenses would definitely be on guard against the invasion of all living beings. Even though Kai Floater had already made all sorts of preparations and had an understanding of almost all the technological knowledge in this universe. But the moment he neared the center of the universe, he still felt dozens of waves sweep past his body, directly exposing him, who had originally been extremely well hidden. After the waves passed, Kai Floater felt an unknown amount of malice lock onto him. These malice, every single one of them came from a powerful weapon that could threaten him. If any of them hit him without holding back, it would be enough to make him lose half his life. Feeling the changes, Kai Floater was shocked. Suddenly, he came to a realization. The technological knowledge I've learned all these years isn't the most advanced technological knowledge in this universe. The truly advanced technological knowledge is around the center of this universe. At this moment, countless attacks were already exploding from all directions, raining down on him. In the blink of an eye, he felt an indescribably terrifying impact. Time, space, matter, and energy around him seemed to be completely sealed at this moment. In his daze, he felt as if death was about to befall him. This feeling was so obvious and so direct that it made him feel as if he was going to lose his life in the next moment. In this moment of imminent peril, Kai Fu Zi roared. The surrounding time and space were completely destroyed by him in an instant. As the space-time collapsed, his figure disappeared in an instant. Then, billions of worlds covered the surroundings and frantically surged out in all directions, replacing the larger and larger cosmos with more and more spaces. This caused the cosmos to gradually change its original appearance from the starry sky to that of a cluster of worlds. Suddenly, it changed from the universe to the world cluster. This instantaneous change was enough to completely block the endless attacks from the surroundings. The countless worlds completely engulfed the countless attacks, and the power of those attacks had indeed reached an unimaginable level. Even those worlds, after being swallowed by those attacks, were all shattered and destroyed. In the blink of an eye, the change in the state of the universe that had begun to gradually affect the entire cosmos was completely cut off. On top of that, it even spread the changes continuously. It caused the region that had originally become a cluster of worlds to revert to the appearance of a normal starry sky. After this change, the entire cosmos seemed to be completely the same as before. However, the powerful attacks that were originally aimed at Kai Fu Zi had completely disappeared, as if they had never appeared. The impact of that change just now was really too great. It was too shocking. The various changes that had occurred in that instant had a shocking destructive effect on matter existing in reality. Among them, the truly powerful countries that could even change the cosmos and space-time had extremely shocking defensive power, easily withstanding this kind of destruction. However, for the other countries that were not that powerful, this kind of destruction had already exceeded their endurance limit. They were directly annihilated in that destruction. Therefore, after this change, only a few of the many forces that originally existed around the center of the universe were left. And even these few forces were extremely terrified at this moment. Although they had already defended against the destructive effect that was based on the foundation of their countries and not the judgment of the living beings that currently controlled those countries. The absolute change that Kai Fu Zi displayed in the instant that he had displayed to the entire universe really shocked those living beings to the point that they suspected that they had just seen an illusion. While those living beings from those countries were in a state of panic, Kai Fu Zi's figure had already appeared in front of the vortex that seemed to be the size of a star. This vortex had a boundless and terrifying suction force. That suction force targeted everything, including time and space. Based on such a suction force, if it was allowed to continue developing, perhaps the entire universe would be swallowed up by it and completely disappear. Perhaps because of this, there were countless strange instruments around the wormhole. Even Kai Boise, who had learned almost all the knowledge in the entire universe, could not understand the layers of defense. This limited the suction force of the wormhole to a certain level, causing the suction force of the wormhole to be unable to spread without any hindrance, standing outside the many instruments and looking at the wormhole that was surrounded by layers of defense. Kai Fu Zi fell into a state of hesitation. Only when he really set foot here did he realize how terrifying the wormhole was. In the depths of the wormhole, there was indeed an aura that was incompatible with this universe and belonged to another world. However, in his senses, that aura was infinitely far away from him. Moreover, along the way, there were countless obstacles that made him feel threatened. He was now a level 8 pseudo-saint who had mastered more than 3,000 types of technological divine abilities, so the existences that made him feel threatened were at least level 9 pseudo-saint. Even if there was only one such danger, it was enough to make him feel troubled, not to mention that there were so many layers of them. "This is going to kill me," Kai Fuzi muttered. He furrowed his brows deeply. At this moment, the various countries had recovered from their panic, and the boundless undulations had once again locked onto Kai Fu's position. When they discovered that Kai Fu Zi had suddenly appeared outside the defense of the wormhole, they panicked once again. Such an unfathomable existence that could completely change the state of the entire universe suddenly appeared around a wormhole that could destroy the entire universe. One could imagine how dangerous it was. "May I know who you are? This is the center of the universe, and it is extremely dangerous. I hope that you can leave this place for the sake of the people in the universe. No matter what your request is, it can be discussed," one of the more impatient countries said directly. As they spoke, the other countries also reacted and also made a promise that any request could be negotiated. Kai Fu Zi could only feel helpless when he heard this. Did they think that he was here to extort the many powerful countries of this universe? He could not be bothered with them. Although these people didn't say anything substantial, it was enough for Kai Fu Zi to make up his mind. If he wanted to break through the barrier of this universe and complete Luo Zun's test, he had to enter that wormhole, no matter how dangerous that wormhole was. And he obviously had not given up on the idea. Therefore, Kai Fu Zi turned his head and glanced at this universe that had given him a lot of benefits. He sighed slightly, lifted his foot, and charged into the layers of defense. These layers of defense were mainly against the wormhole, to prevent the wormhole's suction from spreading without limit. There was almost no defense against the outside world. This was also the main reason why those countries did not attack Kai Fu Zi, even though they were panicking because of his presence. Instead, they wanted to negotiate with Kai Fu Zi. Such a defense naturally did not pose any threat to Kai Fu Zi. He was very relaxed. He passed through layer after layer of defense, and in the blink of an eye, he had already charged into that wormhole. Such a scene caused the living beings in the many countries to stare with their mouths agape. Suddenly, someone said, "This person is committing suicide? This is suicide. Isn't it a little too classy?" Kai Fu Zi naturally did not know that his actions were seen as suicide by the other living beings. At this moment, he felt the terrifying power of the wormhole acting on his body, pulling him from all directions. Even though he was a level 8 pseudo-saint, and his body was so strong that it was unimaginable to ordinary cultivators, he could not withstand such a terrifying tearing force. He felt as if his body had been divided into countless tiny particles, and he was only able to forcefully gather them together with his strong willpower and barely maintain his complete appearance. However, this state of using his willpower to gather his body could not last forever. If it was too long, he would still not be able to withstand it and would be torn into pieces by that terrifying power. By then, he would die. His soul would scatter from the outside. This wormhole looked like an incomparably dark whirlpool that even absorbed all light. However, when one actually charged into this wormhole, they saw a scene of flowing lights. The endless light circulated within the wormhole. Some of these lights came from billions of years ago, when the universe was born. Some came from more recent times, or even from just now, When Kai Fuzi stood around the wormhole, thinking and hesitating, the many rays of light formed a bizarre and dazzling scene. It was as if the entire development process of the universe had been compressed and displayed in front of him at the same time. At first glance, it seemed to be extremely chaotic, but upon closer inspection, one would discover that the situation was extremely chaotic. It contained some kind of supreme laws of time and space, and it even contained profound mysteries that could allow one to become a level 9 pseudo-saint. The bobber did not notice this at first. However, he was, after all, extraordinary. Very quickly, he was touched and discovered some details that he had neglected for a long time. He could not help but reveal a shocked expression on his face. He murmured, This is the direction of my future cultivation." At this moment, he even pulled out a little of his will that had gathered in one part of his body. His body suddenly expanded 10,000 times in that instant. At the same time, it was also 10,000 times thinner. Previously, when his body was still the size of a normal human body, it had the appearance of an incomparably real human body. But now, after it had expanded 10,000 times, he looked even more illusory than the souls of ordinary people, as if he did not exist. Currently, only those with truly great eyesight would be able to see that his current figure was still there. With his body suddenly becoming like this, Kai Fu Zi naturally could not keep his body from changing shape under the power of the wormhole. In an instant, his body, just like the boundless light in the surroundings, it began to revolve around the center of the wormhole in an eternal cycle. Round after round, round after round, it circulated with the light that had entered the wormhole since ancient times, circulating with every moment that entered the wormhole. All the light that belonged to the entire universe at this moment circulated together. In a trance, he seemed to feel as if he had already transcended time and space, becoming an incredible existence that was no longer shackled and restricted by time and space. He seemed to have existed in every moment from ancient times to the present, as well as in every corner of the universe. Standing at any location in the universe, as long as one had enough eyesight, one could see everything in the entire universe by raising one's eyes and looking out. Deducing with this logic, it was obvious. Any light emitted from every location in this universe would definitely enter the black hole at the center of this universe. Therefore, the light that entered this black hole at every instant would definitely contain the light of all the space in the entire universe. In other words, if a corresponding method was used to separate the light that entered this wormhole at every instant, that would be a complete universe. Based on this logic, at this moment, the endless light that was circulating around a certain point with Kai Fu Zi in this wormhole was the gathering of the images of the universe at every instant since the birth of the ancient universe. Circulating and operating with these scenes, what was the difference between this feeling and transcending time and space? Kai Fu Zi quietly experienced this feeling. In a trance, he felt that the 9th step below Sage that was extremely far away was suddenly pulled closer to him. In a trance, he had a feeling that he only needed to lift his foot slightly, and he would be able to step onto that step and become a true level 9 false sage. Just as this feeling appeared, Kai Fu Zi suddenly came to his senses. At this moment, he discovered that the incomparably terrifying tearing force in this wormhole no longer posed any threat to him. His figure had completely recovered at some point, and he was still a lively Kai Fu Zi in the wormhole, naturally circling around a certain point in the depths of the wormhole. Luo Fan felt a little helpless when he saw the bobber's performance. However, this helplessness was not due to his disappointment in his performance. Instead, it was due to his helplessness towards his heaven-defying luck. Kai Fu Zi could comprehend the next step of the space-time path in the wormhole, but this was not arranged by him. In fact, although all the universes used as the test grounds were created by Luo Fan. However, Luo Fan did not completely set up the specific way to pass these universes. In fact, the way he created these universes was more based on the abstruse use of the second level of the law of cause and effect. The way these universes were formed was the effect of the law of cause and effect. Or, more specifically, it was the effect of the river of luck. What kind of dangers he would encounter, and what kind of harvest he would obtain in the process of clearing the levels. Although this was achieved with the help of Luo Fan, it was fundamentally his own luck. At this moment, Kai Fu Z could comprehend a deeper level of the space-time path and the wormhole. This was also his luck. Suddenly, Luo Fan had a strange feeling. He could not help but frown. The test this time is a little strange. Why does it seem like it was specially made to bring benefits to Kai Fu Z? With this thought, Luo Fan's heart trembled. He started to activate the godly power that he had obtained when he participated in Wu Zun's Fate Union ceremony. The moment this godly power was activated, it was born out of nowhere in the depths of the chaotic state. The river of luck path that connected countless perfect worlds and vast worlds appeared before his eyes. Luo Fan already had the ability to sense the river of luck path. In particular, after he cut off a small part of the connection with the river of luck path, this sensing ability became stronger and clearer. This was not difficult to understand. For example, if one wanted to see the specific appearance of a river, if one sank to the bottom of the river, what one could see would be extremely limited. However, as long as one jumped out of the river, one would naturally be able to see the direction of the river clearly. However, this sensing ability was after all limited. At this moment, when he wanted to see the changes in the river of luck path, it was somewhat insufficient to rely on his sensing ability alone. Under such circumstances, the godly power that he had obtained from the Book Supreme became the best supplement for Luo Fan to observe the river of luck path. It was not that the power of that divine ability itself was much stronger than Luo Fan's own perception ability. It was that the method of observation used by this godly power was different from Luo Fan's sensing ability. These different methods of observation complemented and compensated for each other. It was like a person's two eyes that only saw a two-dimensional picture. However, when combined, it could form a three-dimensional effect. It could produce a huge and intense complementation, allowing Luo Fan to sense the river of luck path many times clearer than usual. This river of luck path was not restricted at this moment. It was extremely vast and connected the entire demon realm like an ocean. It even connected the entire Earth and the universe. While it appeared extremely grand, it also appeared extremely thin and difficult to see through. Luo Fan had already been mentally prepared for this appearance of the river of luck path. However, he was not surprised at this moment. He was not disappointed either. Relying on the connection between his own luck path and the river of luck path, he began to quietly sense the location of the connection point between him and the river of luck path. With his own luck path as a guide, finding the specific location of the river of luck path was as easy as finding the location of the fishing hook through the fishing line. Very soon, Luo Fan saw the point that was extremely closely connected to him at a certain location in the river of luck path. After discovering that point, Luo Fan's expression suddenly became extremely ugly. This was because he discovered that the point he was at was suffering from some kind of strange pressure from another point that was quite far away. This kind of pressure made it seem as if a certain existence in that point of his was being absorbed by another point, or rather, replicated. Even though the point that was connected to his luck wasn't damaged or destroyed, there were many hindrances when it moved. It was as if every movement required the other point to move, and the other point needed to move as well. Luck path entrustment. Looking at the relationship between the 2 points, this term flashed through Luo Fan's mind. The scene in front of him was clearly a manifestation of someone entrusting luck path to his own luck path. Although Luo Fan did not have a deep understanding of the river of luck path, he could see at a glance that this connection caused all his actions to bring unexpected benefits to the living being whose luck path was connected to the other point. In fact, all of his actions would unknowingly bring benefits to someone else. After guessing the effect of the connection between the 2 points, how could Luo Fan not understand that the person corresponding to the other point was Kai Fuzi? The tests of the many universes that he had set up for Kai Fuzi were obviously due to this change, which was why Kai Fuzi could obtain so many benefits from them.